If you'll join me in the flag salute. And Ms. Sopwin, if you give us the lack of TV coverage announcement, I guess, today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This Planning Commission hearing will not be televised live due to the fire that is occurring here in Santa Barbara. Rebroadcast of the Planning Commission hearing will be on Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. on CSB TV Channel 20. And for the roll call, Commissioner Cooney?
Here.
Commissioner Brown?
Here.
Commissioner Brooks?
Here.
Commissioner Valencia?
Here.
Commissioner Blau?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Black. If you'll do the agenda status report and the projection report, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Item C1 on your agenda is going to be dropped. We're recommending that you drop it, and we'll reschedule it if and when it becomes appropriate to be before the commission. We have one item, number 5, which I'm going to recommend we take slightly out of order, and I'd like to suggest that item number 5, which is the Ocean Meadows Golf Course rezone and addition, be taken right after the commission breaks for lunch. So that should give the public time to come here, and we'll accommodate some scheduling issues that we have. Other than that, we're ready to move forward with all of the items on the commission's agenda today.
Great, thank you. And
With respect to the projection report, Mr. Chair, your next meeting will be next Wednesday, May 13th, and that's at the Solving Veterans Memorial Building. We'll be taking up the Santa Ynez Community Plan public comment items. On May 20th, your hearing is canceled. Your next scheduled meeting is June 3rd, and we had not finalized a location for that meeting. We've indicated that we could have it either in the North or the South County. Besides the Santa Ynez Community Plan that day, we have placed a small item on the agenda that I'm hoping the commission can accommodate, and that is consideration of a time extension ordinance due to economic hardships. This is something that I think a lot of people in the community are interested in seeing, and so it's something we would like to get through the process as quickly as we can.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. I had spoken to Long Range Planning about the possibility of having an evening meeting in the Santa Ynez Valley on the 3rd. There's been many calls to Supervisor Farr's office to request one evening meeting for the sake of the people who do work and cannot make it next week to the 13th hearing, and I'd like to know if that can be considered.
I think that's a question for us, not so much for staff. I'm not agreeable to make that arrangement, at least as of today, based on the first meeting we have where we take public testimony. If I'm convinced that there are lots of people who would speak and there's controversial issues, that may be appropriate, but I think we need to wait until we have the first meeting in Solving and get a flavor of the public's interest or lack of it, or the issues before we decide. I would make comment to everybody that's listening to this that if you're unable to make and to come to a meeting and to provide testimony, you always have the ability to write a letter. And I can assure you, from working with my fellow commissioners on this commission in the past, a well-written letter is carefully analyzed, carefully read, and considered, and sometimes is actually much more effective than the 3 minutes worth of public testimony. So I don't think anybody's precluded from making comment, but I think it's appropriate that we make that decision after the second hearing, when we take public comment in Solving. Those are my thoughts. Anybody else wish to pipe in? Commissioner Brown.
I'm just wondering, well, I've always supported evening meetings because I think it facilitates the public process, but I'm just wondering if perhaps we couldn't schedule, I'm not sure exactly what we're going to be considering at each hearing, but perhaps since this next meeting is next week, perhaps looking at the June meeting, since we know that that's some ways away, and maybe for planning purposes, it might be easier to accommodate it. I'm not sure, but I don't know how that would be for Commissioner Brooks or what your needs are, but.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau and Commissioner Brown. I was looking at possibly the June 3rd.
Okay.
Because we do have one other item. Again, it's up to staff and working the logistics. And I do agree with Chair Blau, to see how everything goes next week, when we are in Solvang, as far as the taping, the delayed taping, and the running on Gate TV. But again, I do, if we're scheduled to have our last meeting on this issue the end of June, and then we start that summer break. And I think it's really important, that we have the public comment in as early as possible so staff can deal with it. So if we could do it in the June 3rd meeting, I think that would be helpful. But
So
again,
I-
it's up to staff.
So I think the consensus is we'll make that decision at the next meeting. I do want to caution you, do we need to put that item on the agenda so we can discuss it, or is it not necessary?
Mr. Chair, I believe you can discuss the location of your subsequent meeting at the hearing next
Okay.
week.
Time and location? Great.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Moving forward, you have more, Ms. Black?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Then we have June 10th as a potentially canceled meeting. We'll hold that and make sure that we don't need that hearing date. June 17th, I'm now proposing that we hold in Santa Barbara. We had the ag ordinances on that day, agricultural streamlining ordinances, and we've shifted those to July 15th. So that was the major driver for having this item in the North County. The Providence Landing development plan and recorded map modification dealing with the park is going to be dropped from the agenda. That's an issue I believe will be resolved at the board level, not by the Planning Commission modifying permits. So we've really taken the two drivers for the North County hearing off that date. So I propose that June 17th be in Santa Barbara. And then our last scheduled special hearing on the San Ynez Community Plan is scheduled for June 29th, which is a Monday. And again, the location is to be determined, depending on where the commission would like to hold that hearing. And we are proposing to switch the North County and South County hearing locations in July. July 8th, we're proposing to take up the Botanic Garden matter, and so we'd like that hearing to be in Santa Barbara. July 15th will be the date for the consideration of the ag permitting ordinance amendments, and so we'd like that to be in Santa Maria. So we're going to propose that be a Santa Maria hearing. And that's really all I had to go over at this point today.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Cooney, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, just a question. You're holding July 1 but don't have any items scheduled. Is it likely that's going to be a canceled date, or we'll just wait and see?
Mr. Chair, I think and Commissioner Cooney, I think it's a bit early to tell. We'll certainly hold it and try to maintain that as a canceled date, but we'll see what the needs are.
I think it's wise to be flexible with regard to the San Ynez Community Plan. If we're on the verge of finishing but just can't quite get it done on the 29th, we would have that as a
Right.
fallback.
Very good point.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. I would like to go back to this possibility of an evening meeting in San Ynez Valley just one time, because I did ask Mr. Johnson of Long Range Planning just to check the venue to see if there were any availabilities, should we decide after the May 13th meeting to try to have that evening meeting.
Mr. Johnson?
Chairman Blau and Commissioner Brooks, there are about 7 dates in June that are available. I understand that Monday nights and Wednesday nights are certainly the nights that I think we've looked at in the past as being appropriate for these special hearings. The 3rd is open for the evening. We can certainly look at that date. Also, the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd of June, those are all Mondays are available. The 17th is available, but as Ms. Black just indicated, you already have a regularly scheduled meeting that day.
Thank you. Are we finished with that? Thank you. Okay. Now is the time for public comment, or anyone is allowed to speak on any item not on today's agenda. You're limited to 3 minutes. I do have one speaker slip for Mr. Thorndike.
Good morning. I'm John Thorndike, and the last time I was at one of these meetings, which was about 6 weeks ago, I said it would be deplorable to have layoffs on top of all the beds we were losing in Carpinteria at the Salvation Army and downtown in Santa Barbara, and things are going about the way I said they would. Dirt flies at Botanic Gardens. They laid a lady off that had, I remember her, she had 28 years of service. She got a picture in the paper for getting laid off, today's paper. Dirt flies at Botanic Garden. And I thought, you know, I could do something about that, and I could do something about this, too. Layoffs all over town, plus downtown Santa Barbara, recovery beds from Salvation Army, and so forth. I thought, what can I do? And the answer is real easy. I paid $100,000 in '91 for a winning victory in a court, and it didn't work. But now I'm gonna use it to my advantage, because the county has elected to take my property. It's under Proposition 99. Now, when they do that, I'll recover that $100,000 that I spent in '91, and anything above that, I'll give half of that to these purposes in an arrangement with the town, and I'd like to do that under a matching fund deal with the county. Now, this is the way I bring the county supervisors in there. They cut me off yesterday. Anyway, I have fun doing this. Some people like golf. I like picking on lawyers, big ones. And I'm after the Attorney General of California. That is, 2 of them. The last one, the current one, and I don't know about the next one, but I'll take on 2 at a time. Have a good day, good people.
Thank you. Okay, Planning Commissioners' informational reports. No lights are on. Planning and Development Divisional briefings. I see you shaking your head. Director's report and Board of Supervisors hearing summary. Oh, excuse me, we're supposed to do the minutes next. Do you want to do, I'll take it out of order, though. Let's do the Director's report, Supervisor hearing summary, so we can let John go back to work.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and members of the board, we have had no items from the Planning Commission before the board. We've had a council meeting, and we have another council meeting coming, but I thought I would just, of interest, and I thought we would be on TV when I came in, so I didn't realize that, but a couple of items yesterday that I think piqued a lot of interest, which were the social host ordinance, which was, I will say, put on hold for more information to be gathered on it, which is essentially, if you're not familiar with the term social host, it's underage drinking financed by people that are of age is essentially what it is, and the idea was to try and stop that. And then the alcohol prohibition on the beach, which was discussed and passed 5-0 in response to a what's called Floatopia. If you haven't heard that one, that's out in the surf and on the beach and drinking a lot and everything, and it's become a very big deal. I mean, the way it was growing, it was going to rival Halloween as it appeared. So they've put the kibosh on that, and so we'll see what happens this weekend when it was supposed to be scheduled. And also on the fire, the press was reporting 400 acres worth of fire. It's really around 200. It's half as much as it was stated in the press earlier. At the present time, they're saying 0% contained. They're feeling fairly good about what they've got. They've got a lot of fire resources in the area from other agencies, and if they can, they're going to work as hard as they can between now and about 3 to 4 o'clock this afternoon when they expect the winds to pick up, because that's their big worry, is the winds. And that's as much as I got out of the EOC a little over half an hour ago. So,
Great,
that's the
thank you.
report.
Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. We appreciate very much keeping us up to date as there is a lot of general public information available due to the efforts, I would say, the experience of our staff and county emergency personnel in dealing with fires over just the last 2 years. It's incredible. Almost as soon as the mutual aid agencies get back home, they're back on their way to Santa Barbara, and it's certainly very concerning as a trend. In spite of the fact that the press is indicating and that the law enforcement agencies are indicating there's an ongoing investigation as to cause, do you have any preliminary information regarding that?
Commissioner Cooney, no, we don't have any information at this point.
All right, thank you.
It's fire season all year anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. And now we do have 3 minutes that we need to approve. The first one being that of April 1st, 2009.
I'll make a motion to approve April 1st minutes.
Second.
We have a motion to approve and second. Ms. Opplin, would you read the roll?
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
And now the meeting's April 8th, 2009.
Make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Is this the one we're going to discuss or not? Okay. Ms. Opplin, the roll.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Now, April 15th, which I believe was our...
Move to approve.
I'll second it. That was the retreat. No discussion. Ms. Opplin.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. Now we'll go to our consent agenda. C1 has been removed from the agenda. Is there any commissioner that wants to pull item C2? Seeing no lights, Ms. Opplin.
Mr. Chair, if we could just take a motion to drop C1. That would be.
I'll move that we drop C1 from the agenda.
Second.
I'll second.
We're gonna do this slightly backwards, Mr. Chair, and have Jessica read it since we are gonna take an action.
Okay. That just brings up a good question. This is the first place I've ever been where consent agenda items are read into the record. They don't do it at the board level. I've never seen it done at any of the city councils I go to. They're published as a consent item taken in one motion. So I don't understand why we do that.
Mr. Chair, actually, at the board, if a separate action is taken on a consent item or there's somebody there to speak, then they do read it into the record. So I think that's what we're trying to get to. But I agree. We used to read everything into the record, and we're certainly trying to pull back from that.
Well, okay. Go ahead and read it into the record then, Jenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Shannon Ferries of Cameron Realty Partners, LLC, owner, to consider case number 08TEX23, application filed on September 26, 2008, and to accept the addendum to 95 EIR 001 as adequate environmental review for the project pursuant to Section 15162 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
So I'll make the motion that we drop it from the agenda. I think there was a second already.
I did second.
Mr. Cooney. Ms. Opplin.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
So do we need to read it? We don't need to read it in C2. No one wishes to be pulled. So we will take a vote on the remainder consent item. Do we need a motion? I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar. Consent items.
I'll second that.
Ms. Opplin.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay, I believe we're ready for our first standard agenda item. Ms. Opplin, if you read it into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Ridge Communications on behalf of Verizon Wireless to consider case number 09-CUP4, application filed May 2nd, 2007, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15303 of the State Guidelines for Implementation of CEQA.
And now I'll ask my fellow commissioners for ex parte and site visits. Okay, Ms. Black, we have a staff report.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Megan Lowry is going to provide the staff presentation today, and I think she just needs to pull up her PowerPoint.
Thank you, Jessica. Paper, my God. Jessica, just for the next one. Oops.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. My name is Megan Lowry. I'm the planner for the project before you, which is the Vincent Farms co-location project on Verizon co-location project at Vincent Farms. As you're aware, this project was before you previously and has been continued to this agenda. As you may recall, the project is located off of Winchester Canyon Road in the North Goleta planning area. The project property is outlined here for you. The proposed project location is on a knoll setback approximately 0.5 miles from the highway on the north side of the property. The proposed project originally was a design for a co-located facility for 3 carriers, excuse me, including a faux barn structure and a faux water tank structure. The water tank structure would hold the antennas and the barn was proposed as the equipment. At your previous hearing on March 4th, the Commission requested the applicant do some further research on the proposed design. The Commission requested the applicant return and have some further justification for the siting on the ridgeline, and this was to include more research as far as the limitations of the coverage requirements, whether or not they could come down off the hill or if that would compromise the proposed coverage area. In addition, your Commission asked that they research alternate designs, including an undisguised pole design, relocating at the Picara Resort, and possibly lowering the existing project down the hillside and or revisiting the barn design. Applicant has done further research regarding the coverage. The coverage objective is to reach both the highway and the residential area around the site in the Winchester Canyon area. The canyon area is a difficult site to reach because of topography, and here's the existing coverage. You can see the yellow is the missing coverage, and the proposed site would cover in both the canyon and areas along the highway. Here's an overlay of more of a topography. Here's their existing site, the Edwards property to north, Elwood Station, and the coverage area, again, is the missing area in Winchester Canyon and along Highway 101. The Vincent Farms project location is outlined here. The reason that the applicant has proposed the water tank design is because it utilizes existing topography to reach a height and coverage, not just the highway, but also the north areas of the canyon. The current water tank design covers the homes in the canyons as well as the curves along the highway. The undisguised pole design would use sub-mount antennas to be lower on the hill and be undisguised, basically just antennas on poles. However, because they are lower in height and would be lower on the hillside, the applicant found that with the RF research, they would not cover the proposed coverage area in the canyons to the north. In addition, it may be potentially more visibly intrusive. They submitted photo simulations of what these poles would look like. As you can see, it's an array of equipment now. Instead of enclosed within a certain area, it would be strung out along the hill, which is typical of these sites. And these do exist within the county. However, it kind of spreads the development out on the hillside. The Car Resort was an alternative that was previously looked at and was found not to be feasible for a few reasons. They found that it also would not cover the canyons to the north because it is lower in elevation, and also any design on a building would be much lower and wouldn't be able to reach through the trees as effectively. It would cover parts of Highway 101 possibly. However, there was physical restraints on trying to locate at this area because Verizon has such a large equipment area, shelter, and also 9 antennas. Lastly, the applicant could not secure a lease with the Car Resort and has explained that. The applicant's here to go into that further if you wish. Lastly, your commission asked if they could possibly move the existing design further down the ridge and or revisit the barn design. This is what the applicant has come back to us with. They could not move the water tower design further down the hillside as stated because then it would compromise the area, wouldn't reach the coverage area to the north. However, they were able to take away the barn feature and bunker the equipment into the hillside behind the hill. There's an existing switchback in which the equipment could be located. BAR looked at this design on the April 24th agenda, and they felt that this was a favorable option, and they supported removal of the barn feature. It was a less visible facility. Here's revised photo sims of the new design. As you can see, the barn feature is removed. This photo simulation is taken from a vantage point directly on the property just below the proposed project location. Here's a vantage point again. This is near Winchester Canyon Road, looking at the hillside and the knoll. As you can see, it's not the only hillside. There's a few rolling hills in the area. There's an existing water tank on this hill, if you can see it right there. And again, here's another vantage point from Cayureal. As you may recall, the complication of this project is that it is located on the ridgeline. However, there's exceptions for this for telecommunications facilities where your commission finds that the project requires this siting. We do encourage normally that they're located below the ridgeline. However, in this instance, we have found that locating below the ridgeline really would severely compromise the coverage to the north. To exempt the project from this finding, your commission would have to find that the area proposed to be served by the facility would not otherwise be served by the carrier proposing the facility. Staff feels that evidence submitted to you allows you to make this finding. Therefore, staff recommends that you adopt the findings as revised, accept the exemption as revised, and approve the subject to conditions as revised. And the revisions referred to the packet that you were handed out. The 3 revisions are some updated language to the findings, nothing of substantial error, just updated language. The exemption is updated to have a updated project description removal of the barn. And lastly, the subject conditions revised also in the packet to you. We added a permit compliance condition, which is standard for telecommunications facilities for long-term monitoring. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Lowry. Questions from the commission? Commissioner Brown.
Ms. Lowry, one option that wasn't presented was siting another antenna on the other side of the hill to cover the canyon, to cover the homes on the north side of the hill. Was that ever considered by the applicant? I realize that that'd require 2 cell sites, but.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, that particular design hasn't been looked at. The pole design, as you can see, is the one that with the arrays. That was the design that they had looked into.
Perhaps the applicant can respond to that question when she comes up.
Okay.
And I guess the other question I had was, you provided a photo sim of what the water tank would look like. Is that what it would look like? Is that an exact rendition of what would be installed?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, the photo simulations are intended to replicate what the facility would look like. Natural wood or real wood can be used for the majority of the facility. The exception being the enclosed, the area directly in front of the antennas does need to be RF transparent. That would be painted to match as required by BAR's conditions.
Thank you.
So any other questions? Would the applicant care to approach the commission?
Good morning. My name is Tricia Knight, and I'm representing Verizon Wireless this morning. And it's been a long time in coming to finally get here, so I wanted to take this opportunity to just give a little bit of history of how we got here, why we need what we're proposing, and then answer any specific questions that you had asked. Megan, if you could start with slide 2, please. So the way that wireless works is that there are usually records that show that there is a need for a site when there are dropped calls, holes in coverage, gaps in coverage, and then they release what they call a search ring, and that's basically a ring that needs to be covered to connect sites to the north and the south. Next slide, Megan. This particular site is to facilitate handoff from the Elwood Station and Highway 101 Edwards sites, which Megan had showed you in her presentation. It's to connect these two sites, which currently have an acceptable dropped rate call. It is also to provide service to Bacara. Verizon Wireless has installed temporary facilities 3 separate times at the Bacara Resort for some of their special events. We have attempted to, in February, I'd say about 4 years ago, had attempted to reach a lease agreement, pursue a facility before Goleta was incorporated with the county. Unfortunately, we were unable to reach a lease agreement, and T-Mobile and Sprint were part of the Vincent Farms application originally, and they were unable to reach that agreement as well. So that is why these carriers have all gone across the highway. Another thing to make note of is if you've ever been to the Bacara, if you're standing at the building looking over the highway, there is a giant grove of eucalyptus trees which screens the facility almost entirely. AT&T does have a site there. It is what we call a microsite, which is a very small site, and it probably gets pretty good coverage for Bacara, people who are visiting, and the immediate vicinity. But speaking from someone who, my father has an iPhone, once you're on the highway, it's very difficult to get through those trees. And so we are also providing coverage, most importantly, to the Canyon homes. With the fires that are burning, have burned, and I've been born and raised here. I was part of Painted Cave, T-fires right next to my father's house. It's important to get coverage to these areas in the event of emergency. Next slide, Megan, please. So it's a little hard to see on the screen, but maybe the TV is a little bit easier here. You can see the home are the existing sites here to the north and the south. Sorry, the facility is where the, oh, there it is. Great. So the facility is proposed here, and you can see the gaps here are the yellow. So along the highway, Bacara is about right here. The fingers of the canyons going back, and you can clearly see the gap there. If you can go to the next slide, Megan, please. The proposed facility would go back into those canyons, cover Bacara, as well as closing that gap in between to the two existing facilities. Next slide, please. So just from a topography aerial view, you can see the proposed facility here, the homes, which if you got closer up on Google Earth, you could see there's quite a few homes back there. We need to be at the height requested to clear this mountain range right here and to close that gap between the two existing facilities. The pole design that we were asked to explore, which we did, if we come down onto the front of that hillside, it does not go back. You can't shoot backwards. So we need to be able to be on top of that hill to go back this way as well as south towards the ocean and the highway. Next slide, please. The project was submitted into zoning by Verizon in April 2007. Prior to that, T-Mobile was pursuing this as close as 2006. So we have been in the process going forward, working with planning staff for quite some time. We've been through BAR 3 separate times in September of 2006, March of 2007, and then most recently here in April of 2009. And I wanted to kind of walk you through the designs that have been considered more for your entertainment than anything else. The first one that was considered was a large 20-foot by 20-foot cylindrical tank with the equipment and antennas inside. The BAR did not consider that a viable option. Next slide, please. The next was a 35-foot grain silo with a barn on the hillside. Next slide, please. The next was possible a windmill, which we have done in the county before. However, with the number of antennas, you end up just locating on the lattice tower itself. They're fully exposed. Once again, we were putting the some of the antennas on the ridge line unexposed as well. The next was the windmill with the barn. Once again, the footprint of the barn very large. Windmill not be able to screen a lot of the antennas. Next slide. This was a windmill with a large cylindrical water tank. Once again, BAR not in big favor of that. Next slide. This one looks like something you would see in Vegas. It's got the water tank surrounded by some BAR suggested landscaping, which obviously adds way too much mass to the hillside and was rejected. Next slide. This one we affectionately call Stonehenge. These are faux rocks where the antennas would be housed. There are no rock outcroppings on site, so this was rejected by BAR as well. The next one is the unexposed antennas on the hillside. Once you start getting the antennas low in profile, these were proposed at about 12 to 15 feet. In order to meet FCC guidelines, we have to fence around the bottoms of each sectors of antennas, so you just end up with a large footprint. Next slide, please. Finally, this was the one that was before you last time, which was the water tank with the barn, and what we decided to do is remove the largest footprint, which was the barn. And next slide, please, Megan. So it went back to BAR on April 24th. They were in great favor of us removing that barn from the hillside, getting it bunkered down below the ridge line, and they conceptually approved that water tank. Due to the pastoral nature of it, it is above a working agricultural field. There's no agricultural development on that hilltop, but it's 12 foot in diameter, very small footprint, brings all of the antennas together, and they are fully screened from view. Next slide, please. So Megan already showed you these, but this is a half a mile from the highway. You can see there is an existing mountainous ridge line behind it that does act as a backdrop. Next slide, Megan. And yes, we do have, it's pretty painstaking, but they actually do take weathered wood and then they are able to paint that weathered wood to look weathered. And so that's the overall goal here. Next slide. Wanted to show you that the existing water tanks, which are immediately adjacent on the hill to the south, are 12 foot by 12 foot. They are functional water tanks. If the property owner was in need for an actual working water tank and wanted to install the type of tank that we're proposing, they would only need a building permit to do so. The only reason is that it's a cell site and not a water tank that we have to go through the planning permit process. So in conclusion, this project has been a long time coming, and we have gotten to where we are through many different designs and considerations by the BAR and staff. The project meets the goals and objectives for coverage by multiple carriers with the smallest possible footprint, a 12 by 12 foot water tank. Multiple designs have been considered, and that most favorable option of the water tank is what's before you. We believe it blends with the existing agricultural functions. A water tank is on a hillside by nature for functionality, and that it's in the least obtrusive location, being approximately a half mile from 101 and removed from residential areas, as well as the fact that we believe that, working through this process over the past 4 years, we know that the coverage area needs to be covered. There is a need for the coverage in the canyons, the highways, the Bacara. We've worked with staff, worked with the BAR. We genuinely feel that we've done our due diligence to provide the best project before you. If for any reason we were not to get approved today, Verizon probably won't be back here. We would leave this area uncovered just because we've gone down all of the different avenues as much as we can. to make good business decisions, to provide the coverage, to do our due diligence with making it as visually unobtrusive as possible in a very small footprint. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer more specific questions.
Mr. Brown has a question.
If you would answer that question
Yes.
about a separate site on the other side of the hill?
Yes, ideally, the smallest footprint again. Once you start having equipment in one place, a cell site to cover it would have to be rather high because we'd be on the back of the hill, lower elevation. You'd have to have another high structure coming up above to shoot back into those canyons. The hilltop really is ideal because it allows for it only increases in 30 feet from the bottom of the hill to the top, but just that little bit really allows that site to get its maximum coverage.
And the other question, which really hasn't been answered, in the diagram, I guess it was just a drawing, the water tank is different than the photo sim. I mean, the design of the tank is different than the photo sim. So which one are you going to use?
The design of the tank in the site plans?
The design of the tank in the photo sim is different than in the drawing that you had with the barn. I presume that's the water tank you're going to use.
The water tank that I showed you is the one that we're proposing.
Because they're different. Photo sim is different than the drawing. So which one are you going to use?
The photo sim. So you're saying the drawings don't reflect what's in the photo sim? Is that what I understand you saying? Okay. The photo sim is what we're proposing.
good.
The BAR will be approving those materials.
Okay, good.
Yes.
And the design?
And the design, that
Okay,
is
good.
correct. We've only got conceptual approval.
No,
We've
that's
still
fine.
got two
No, no.
more to go.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. This is supposed to be eventually a co-located site.
That is
I believe.
correct.
You anticipate some other companies coming in.
That is correct.
Could you give me some idea of what will that look like when two more companies come in?
Right.
Will all their equipment and their antennas be able to go into the same facility?
Right, that's a good question. What happened was T-Mobile started with this application, and for budgetary reasons, carriers kind of either have budgets for things or don't. Verizon took over. It was Sprint and T-Mobile that were interested. The property owner has a signed lease with these carriers, so Verizon is obligated in entering into that lease to make room for these other carriers. So what that will look like is the water tank will have a cylinder. Verizon will be inside the antennas. The next carrier, whether it be T-Mobile, Sprint, or whomever, will be below Verizon. And then there's a proposal within the site plans that shows antennas flush mounted to the legs. So the most that this could accommodate would be 3 carriers. We are making room within our equipment compound for the other 2 carriers. So when they come, it would most likely be either a substantial conformance or a building permit type situation, but that area will already be available to them.
Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a question concerning the extension of Winchester Canyon Road going directly north. And looking at the alignment of the antennas at 90, 180, and 270, and considering the beam width, that leaves possibly about 130 degrees of uncoverage in the extension of Winchester Canyon going north. Are there any homes in that back area?
There are, and I knew you were going to ask that. I brought the Verizon radio frequency engineer, and I thought he could maybe color a better picture for you. And after the last Planning Commission, we did look at the way that the antennas were oriented, and you can skew them to cover a specific area. So I'll let him speak a little more to that, because we are changing the way they're oriented just a little bit.
That is a very astute question. If we go back to my name is John Thornton. I'm the senior radio engineer for Verizon Wireless on the Central Coast. If we go back to the computer-generated coverage plots from this site, I'm not sure if we have that readily available. It gives a better perspective on the actual orientation that the antennas will be. They will still be contained within the structure, so there will be no change in appearance of the water tank. However, the antenna orientation is slightly different. If you look and you can see above the T of Vincent Farms, there's an aerial pointed.
Mr. Thornton, there's a pointer there.
Oh,
If you could
I'm
use
sorry.
it
Very good.
that way.
At about, you can see the arrow right there. These are the individual sectors. This one is pointed probably at about 345, 350 degrees. to send signal up into the canyon. There's another sector that points over toward the Bacara Resort and another one to pick up to help facilitate the handoff to Elwood Station. So if we go to the next slide, we can see what kind of coverage we get from that. This darker green coverage will provide very good service. You can see the white areas here. That's just the topography that shows that there will be very little to no signal up at these further ends of the canyon. But what we've done here is covered a lot of homes that weren't previously covered at all. I went up into the canyon here on this road here and this one, and currently the phones go into no service in the area. So I imagine that none of the residents there subscribe to Verizon service if it's important to have coverage at their home.
So there's a spillage, considering the bandwidth of the alignment of the axes, there's like 30 or 45 degrees on each side.
Yeah.
And then there's a spillage beyond that.
Yes.
Of coverage, so that at probably 0 degrees north, there probably is limited coverage, depending if you're not in a slightly dead zone or something, if you're high enough.
The antennas that I've chosen for this site are 65-degree horizontal beam width antennas. So that means that at that point, half of that, you're down 3 decibels from the main direction that the antenna is pointing, approximately 350 degrees.
So you're at 332 from the alignment. You're at 332.5 from the alignment.
Uh-huh.
And so that's the max line. So what I'm trying to ask is, beyond that, there's a very limited, but there is some spillage coverage.
Actually, there would be very good coverage
Oh,
for the 360 degrees, the way I have the antennas oriented. The only limitation here is the terrain.
Okay.
The antennas are 65-degree horizontal beam width. That means after the 65 degrees, there is some roll-off, but it's not
Okay.
terribly significant.
Okay. Thank you. And I remember you from past years.
I remember you as well, and always enjoy your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. I would like to know, do the people living in the canyon have other options besides Verizon at this point? Or are they totally without cell phone coverage?
Unfortunately, I'm not able to answer that question. When I came down and made some measurements in the canyon, the only equipment that I had was for Verizon service, so I can't say that I know. I think the coverage there is probably very spotty for most of the residents.
Commissioner Brown.
This little area here, where there's no coverage, I presume are those the eucalyptus trees at Bacara?
This actually does provide some coverage. It's just not as strong. The strongest is the red, followed by the blue. You can see
Right.
it sort of dropping off. This, I believe, is actually out in the channel.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Cooney. Oh, you know, Mr. Palencia.
Yes, Mr. Chair, there was one final question. We received a letter from a Mrs. Bragg, a PhD, and she's very concerned about the propagation, radio frequency radiation, and I'm sure it's IEEE, and perhaps you can just say something to that effect.
Yeah, all Verizon facilities, and this is among all the cell carriers, they all are responsible for maintaining compliance with the FCC rules. There's a federal regulation that covers RF exposure from cell sites, and this facility is compliant with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now I'll ask, is there anybody from the public that wishes to comment on this item? Seeing none, having no slips, I'll bring it back to the commission for deliberation. Commissioner Brown, are you going to lead us on this?
Well, I can. This is in the 3rd District, but I'll be happy to start off, and I just want to acknowledge the effort that Verizon has gone to work with the county to work with us and our standards, because I know you know how important it is that we hide these things. I've been in North Carolina most recently, where their cell sites are pretty eye-popping amazing, and there's no care taken to kind of conceal them or hide them or even landscape or do anything. So it is with appreciation that you work with us, because we know that it is important, you know that it's important for the community, and for those of people who have cell phones, it's important as well, so thank you. So I don't have any further discussion. My questions were answered about the siding on the reverse side, and also the, what it's going to look like. That would be very important to me, and I have my assurances met, so I'm ready to support the project.
Commissioner Valencia.
Mr. Chair, I'm ready to support the project. I find that it is going to meet the needs of the people.
Commissioner Cooney.
I have hesitance to support the project still because of the particular location on what is essentially a nude hilltop. We have before us today another installation request that takes full advantage of a grove of trees, and it's very, very difficult to see and distinguish the cell site from the natural terrain. Here it's not. We're creating a feature which is in direct contravention to the stated ridgeline policy for cell sites. And so what we're really basically doing, I think Ms. Knight was very upfront about this, is we are making the best of a bad situation. That is, we're compromising in favor of coverage. We're compromising one of our most important policies, and that is to reduce development on hilltops. Given that, the question is, what could we put up there that is the least obtrusive type of tower? And I have the hope that after 50 years or so, that well will be noticed by no one, and we will get used to it. But for the time being, it does stick out, and I frankly am willing to support it only because I believe the cell industry does have certain rights under federal law, which Santa Barbara County can only offset in specific clear cases where the design has not been as thoroughly investigated as this. So I don't think this is the case we should make our stand on, and compliments to Verizon for sticking it out and working with us.
Mr. Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. This is a third district item, I believe. I do appreciate Verizon's efforts too. I mean, you have a history and a package of attempts to make this acceptable. I just still have a problem when I travel on 101 with the potential visual impacts. When I look at the packet on the page where you show the water tower, this was in the Verizon packet. And then on the next page, you show the existing 12 by 12 water tank at an adjacent hill. Again, you don't even see the water, well, you barely see it because of the existing landscaping, the trees that are there. If there was something on this ridge, I would say, and perhaps 20 years from now, 40 years from now, if something was planted, it would happen. But my other concern, because it is so visible and because of the potential visible impact, the visual impacts there, later today we are looking at a co-located site where there's no more room, for what they had originally intended. And that is in an area that's very densely camouflaged, I'd say. And we're moving that one we might be moving that one about 100 yards away. And I worry that, let's say, 2-3 years from now, when the other companies come in, that if, maybe that same situation might arise. So I do have concerns of, this is just possibly the beginning of more, even though I think everyone will attempt to keep it very limited and very unobtrusive. We did receive one letter stating that there had been a history of some neighbor. I'm very surprised, that we don't have neighbors here today, one way or the other. If if people in the canyon need this coverage, I would have hoped to have heard from some. And I feel that, that is a necessity, but I don't know. Perhaps they have coverage, from other companies. Again, just because of the visual impacts and the fact that it's somewhat, for me, still violates, our county philosophies about ridge lines, I couldn't support it today. So I'll respect the rulings of my fellow commissioners.
That being the case, if there's no further discussion, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve per the staff's recommendation with the changes and the other documents that you delivered late. Ms. Black, would you like to clean that motion up?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Just to be clear, it'd be approving the findings in Attachment A of the May 6th, 09 staff memo, accepting the CEQA exemption included as Attachment B to the 4/17/09 staff memo, and I'm tracking the original recommendations, and approve the project subject to conditions included as Attachment C to the 4/17/09 memo and the 5/6/09 memo.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Hoffman, if you'll call the roll.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
No.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 4-1.
Great. We'll take a small break and set it for the next item. Thanks.
CUP 29, application filed on May 30th, 2008, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15303 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you. And now ask my fellow commissioners for site visits, ex parte discussions. Mr. Brown.
I drove up through the Cavalletta Ranch and onto the Water District property, looked at that cell site, and came down and through another road. I'm not really quite sure where I was, but I just took available roads to go up there, so I saw those. Thank you. And I live in the neighborhood, too.
Mr. Cooney.
Mr. Chair, I do have prior acquaintance with this site due to the previous cell site installation, which we'll talk about, but I also revisited to reacquaint myself with the area from various vantage points.
Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I drove up Patterson and La Jose Road or whatever. That's as far as I got.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, I drove up Patterson and I went too far, but I did see the water tank in the distance when I was coming back down Patterson. But I do have a sense of the entire neighborhood now. Thank you.
Thank you. For myself, I used to use Google Earth. Works out really well, by the way. So, Ms. Lowry, are you our staff report again this morning? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, again, I'm Megan Lowry, the planner for the project. Now before you is T-Mobile telecommunications facility at the Cavalletta Ranch. Cavalletta Ranch, as you're familiar with, is also in the Glida planning area off of North Patterson Avenue and also La Josa Road. The property is an old ranch that was actually pre-existing before La Josa Road was named, which is why it has the Patterson address. It is a working ranch. Here's the property outlined before you. It's approximately 70 acres. And you can see in the bottom south side is the Glida Water District property, which pretty much just contains a water tank and an existing cell site. Here's the star represents the existing cell site on the Water District property. Because it is a tight property, the proposed project couldn't locate another tree on that within those property lines. So instead, they co-located, but on the Cavalletta Ranch, which is adjacent. The second star indicates the project location. Here's a view from the Cavalletta Ranch looking back towards the water tank. The property is zoned Ag 240, which is, I want to correct in the staff report, it was inconsistently noted. It is Ag 240, not Ag 220. The parcel is 70.45 acres. Proposed project would be a similar faux tree adjacent to the AT&T facility, but on the Cavalletta Ranch property. The arrow indicates, points out the existing faux pine tree that is owned by AT&T, and also Clearwire is additionally on the tree co-siding. The red arrow indicates the location of the proposed project. Another reason why the proposed project is, or the applicant is proposing an additional tree is because they can't co-locate on the existing tree because it is at maximum capacity with the existing equipment of both AT&T and Clearwire. Here's a picture of the plans, which basically shows that the tree would be similar but lower down the ridge line, so it would actually be lower in visibility in front of the eucalyptus. It would be 55 feet in height, and because that is above 50 feet, it requires a major conditional use permit approved by your commission. Here's some pictures. This is a view from La Josa Road. The arrow points out the existing AT&T facility. Proposed facility for T-Mobile would be located lower down on the other side of the eucalyptus. Another view, this is from the Cavallito Ranch property looking up at the water tank. There's the existing facility, and the proposed one would be just lower behind, in front of it. Again, here's the existing, and it would be located lower on this. This is the project location right there is the footprint. Here's a view from the surrounding neighborhood. As you can see, the arrow points out the existing facilities. It blends in with the existing foliage of the property. Even though it's a pine tree, there's eucalyptus on the property. Because of the multitude of vegetation in the area is disguised quite well. The proposed facility would likewise be a tree and would be lower down, would also blend with the existing vegetation. Here's another view from houses on the same road. There's the existing facility, and the proposed one would be right below it. The main topics of analysis that we looked at for this project is aesthetics and health and safety. As always with telecommunications facilities, both are a concern. The proposed facility was designed as a faux tree to integrate with the existing foliage, as we discussed, and also additional landscaping would be required per the Goleta Community Plan requirements. Health and safety was determined to be a non-issue because the proposed facility, in addition to the existing facilities, would still comply with FCC requirements and would rather be quite low, and that's a cumulative reading. The facilities are required to comply with FCC requirements in a cumulative fashion at all times. So they're not required to just look at their own emissions, but all emissions within the existing area. Therefore, staff recommends that you adopt the findings for this project, accept the exemption, and approve the project subject to conditions. That concludes my presentation.
Questions by commissioners? Commissioner Brown.
Ms. Lowry, I was interested when I was on the Water District property to see what that faux tree looked like. And I was sort of disappointed that the top of it is just, the bottom looks okay, looks very faux tree, but the top with its antennas doesn't. It looks like just the antennas, and they plastered on the plastic limbs. This was done, I guess, in 2005? I'm not sure. So is the new faux tree going to look more tree-like, or is it going to look exactly like the one in the Water District?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, there hasn't been an enormous leap in technology advancements as far as the design of these trees. However, BAR would be reviewing the design of this tree and would have the ability to make comments, and as far as that's technologically feasible, they could alter the design of the tree if possible. There is some limitation. The brackets that hold the antennas clearly are there for a functional purpose, and they basically cover the antennas with faux branches, as you're describing. So to a degree, it could be altered by BAR's comments if they can work with color, design. Also, when the trees are installed, we do permit compliance, and the conditions, as you've seen in the staff report, read that we go out to the field and make sure that the trees are installed to be non-symmetrical, basically, so it's not perfectly symmetrical to the best of their ability. So we do watch for that as they're installing it.
Well, I guess my concern was that rather than make it look sort of asymmetrical, it looks like they just plastered on the tree material onto the antennas. So rather than having branches go out and you kind of seeing the antennas, but they may be painted green to blend, it was very obvious because of the way the material was applied to the antennas. So that was my question, is if there's some way that it can be nestled in the tree rather than trying to make it look like something that it's not. And we haven't seen many of these faux pines at the Planning Commission. So I would be interested to know if the BAR, when they look at that, if they could consider that the antennas are nestled in the tree rather and painted this dark color such that it doesn't look like, and the antennas are just an afterthought.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Brown, I think, if I understand you correctly, to bring the antennas in closer to the trunk, for lack of...
Right, exactly.
And so that they're not they're not sticking out as much as possible, bring them close in, so they're not outside
and I
of the
think
branches.
also that the tree at the Water District was more, it didn't have a nice sort of, it had a more cylindrical shape rather than more
Gradual.
Yeah, a gradual shape. And maybe that might make a difference too. So I don't know, BAR has, we had BAR, they saw this, right? They've seen this?
Yes, the BAR
And
has seen
what were
this.
their comments? Was this the one that there was no comments?
No significant comments. They
Right.
appreciated the blending with the foliage and using the tree design.
Okay.
was
That would
about-
be my concern, is that it really looks like a pine tree, not just some cylindrical, that would be my only concern.
Commissioner Cooney.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, Commissioner Brown's comments have stimulated me to talk about my experience driving around the state of California and looking at different pine tree installations in particular. And I'd love to show the commission photos of installations in the forests of the Sierra where the coloring is so bad that you not only identify it as a cell site, but it actually makes it look worse than if they had just stuck the pole there with the antennas on. We also have an early example in the first district of a pine tree Commissioner Valencia has noticed before, and it was extremely amateurish in terms of the coloring, so that it really sticks out rather than blends in. And I will have to say, with regard to this particular pine tree, the one that is already installed, it does blend with the surrounding mature foliage, the eucalyptus trees. So the coloring, I think, is getting better. And with Ms. Lowry in our camp, as far as taking charge of this, I have no doubt that that it will get better and better. So I share Commissioner Brown's concerns, but I think the coloring is probably the most important issue, unless you get right up next to it and see those antenna installations.
Thank you. Now, the applicant wish to make a presentation?
Mr. Chairman, Planning Commission, my name is Rob Searcy. I'm with SureSite Development. I'm here today representing T-Mobile and OmniPoint Communications. I think Megan's done a commendable job describing the project, and I'm appreciative of the fact that you've gone out to the site and you're aware of what's going on here. Just to give you a very quick overview of what transpired to get to this point, when T-Mobile issues a search ring, they're usually about 1/3 to 1/4 of a mile in diameter. We have a hierarchy of what we seek to look at as far as a co-location opportunity. Here at this site, we were able to find the water tank site with the AT&T site. Unfortunately, as Megan has described, Clearwire beat us to the bunch, and so they were able to co-locate there. And for our second option, we also looked to see if there was an opportunity on site for us to put in a new facility. Probably for one of the few times in my career, an adverse situation, and probably turned out to be a better situation for us, because it forced us to look at some other options off-site but stay in the same general area. And that's how we arrived at locating at the site that we have now proposed, which in the long run serves, I think, from an aesthetic standpoint, with a much better presentation. We're off the knoll, we're a little bit lower, we're able to utilize the existing mature vegetation to integrate our site and assimilate much better. As far as the compound, we're also looking at integrating a color mixture to integrate that as well, to soften the texture of that and to integrate that into the existing natural environment. Our primary objective on this site is to hit the area that is bounded really by Vineyard, De La Hosa, and by Patterson, and that's the residential area to the west and to the southwest. The orientation of the site also provided an opportunity for us to bring it down in height a little bit. Although we're 5 feet over the maximum required height, it really addresses Commissioner Brown's concern over the design of the tree itself. We're 5 feet over because we need boughs to go up to give it more of a natural feel and to be able to integrate our antennas into the boughs of the tree. and we're looking at a design that's much more conical than cylindrical. And so that is an effort for us to bring our antennas in as close as possible, but still integrate them so they don't stand out and project beyond the brows. One of the other concerns that I heard both of you and Commissioner Cooney express was the color treatment and presentation of the boughs and things like that. I think Megan's right. The design of the trees hasn't changed a lot, but one of the things that we have looked at doing, and I think we've been very successful at doing in the industry, is making our manufacturers color or UF treat the boughs so that over time they don't lose the color. So the color that goes in stays in place much longer, and you'll see a much easier integration and long-term preservation of that color. A couple of the other things I just want to talk about is, I think based on the evaluation of working with staff has really put our feet to the fire, and we'll be able to come up with a design that is consistent with the code in almost every aspect. There's a very high standard that's expected here in the county, and I think that it's made the carriers be much more cognizant and sensitive to that, and I think in this case we've been able to achieve that. One of the other things I do want to bring to the point is that there is a microwave dish attached to this facility as well. It's a 2-foot diameter microwave dish that's located about 32 feet above grade. That appendage is actually for data transmittal, and I don't mean to take advantage of a situation that may be very precarious right now, but the fire is always something that we're worried about, and that T-Mobile is a member of the E911 system for those jurisdictions who have E911 communication. That's a communication that connects directly into the regional emergency services. And so when 911 calls come out, the site directly directs the call into that service as opposed to going to the highway patrol. So I think with that, I'll conclude my presentation because I think staff has adequately addressed most of the issues, and I'll entertain any comments or questions that you have.
Thank you. I don't see any lights on, so now I'll ask if there's anybody from the public that wishes to comment on this.
Thank you.
Have no slips, see no hands. I'll bring it back to the commission. Okay, this is a third district? Second district? Okay. Commissioner Brown.
Well, I'm ready to move the staff's recommendation if everyone's satisfied with this project. And before I do that, just want to again thank the applicant for working with the county and making these sites blend in with the environment. I think that it's really gratifying that when we have that opportunity, when you can do that and work with the county and work with the neighborhoods so that we don't really know they're there. So based upon that, I would just like to move staff's recommendations to adopt the required findings for the project specified in attachment A, including the CEQA findings, to accept the exemption under CEQA guidelines, section 15303, included as attachment B, and approve the project. Case number 08 CUP string 00029, subject to the conditions included as attachment C.
I'll second.
We have a motion second. Any further discussion? Commissioner Cooney.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to make two comments. One, I think this project really ought to serve as the poster child if we can encourage the industry to follow the standards being set with these two towers, the way they're concealed, and the conscientiousness of trying to serve their customers at the same time as paying attention to our rigid rules really comes forth in this application. Secondly, this is maybe Ms. Lowry's fifth or sixth presentation to the commission, and I just want to comment that she presents these projects in a very thorough but concise manner, and inspires a lot of confidence in me that all the rocks have been overturned, and so I'm much more inclined to follow her lead than I am in other cases, and I think we're fortunate to have her working on these cell sites.
And I'll second that.
Great. Having done that, Ms. Hoplin, if you read the roll.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Do we need time to set up for the next item? Just a couple minutes, and we'll just stay live and get to it. Yeah. Ms. Sopelin, if you'll read it into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Peter Margolis, applicant, to consider the following. 09 CUP 11, application filed on March 13th, 2009. 08 CDP 53, application filed on April 29th, 2008, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15303C of the State Guidelines for Implementation of CEQA.
And it's Mr. Ward for the staff report, am I correct? Oh,
Mr. Briggs.
I'm sorry. I'm getting there.
Good morning, Commissioners. I would like to quickly present to you the Tomra Pacific Recycling Center in Isla Vista. The project site is located within the Isla Vista Commercial Core at 939 Embarcadero Del Mar. The site is located within the coastal zone, is approximately 0.23 acres in size, and is currently zoned C2. Once the master plan is certified by the Coastal Commission, the site will be rezoned to community mixed use. And when you're coming into Isla Vista, you would travel south down Embarcadero Del Mar. The site is directly behind the Isla Vista Market here. There are two ways to access the parking lot behind the market. One by coming through the side entrance here from Embarcadero, and then secondly, there's another curb cut opening here on Madrid Road. And the recycling center bins are currently located here in the southwest corner. The project is a request for a major conditional use permit and a coastal development permit to allow an existing unpermitted recycling center located in the parking lot behind Isla Vista Market. The recycling center consists of two metal roll-off bins totaling approximately 272 square feet in size and placed side by side. And as I just said, the center is currently located in the southwest corner, but as part of the project, it would be relocated to the southern property line as shown here. And that was to basically buffer, there's an existing residential use directly behind the parking lot, and we wanted to put a little more distance in between the recycling center and that residential use. Here's a close-up of the site. You can see the location of the bins here. We do have there is a setback modification request as part of the project. The rear yard setback is required to be 10 feet, and as part of this project, they would be reduced to 5. And the idea behind that is basically to pull the recycling center as close to the property line as possible so that they can have circulation in the parking lot. And we are trying to minimize the area that this takes up within the parking lot. Also, as part of the project, some landscaping would be planted behind it in order to screen it to the south. We have a couple of other commercial uses to the south there, and we just wanted to bulk up. There is one existing tree, and we wanted to bulk this up by planting 2 more trees and then a hedge behind it to screen it from the south. Here's a picture of what it would look like, in use on an average day. The center would does accept glass, plastic, and aluminum beverage containers from the public in exchange for cash vouchers, which can be redeemed at the neighboring market. The center is certified by the California Department of Conservation and meets the requirements of the California Beverage Container and Litter Abatement Act of 1986. And AB 2020 basically mandated markets which sell more than $2 million in gross sales to also provide recycling within 1/2 mile of the market. And that can either be done internally by the market, or they can contract this function out to someone like Tomra Pacific here. The center would operate from Tuesday through Friday from 10 to 4, and on Saturdays from 8:30 to 5. The roll-off containers would be removed from the site and exchanged with clean, empty containers once they've been filled up with recyclables. Pickups at the facility would occur 3 to 5 times per month and would occur during normal business hours. The project was conceptually reviewed by the Board of Architectural Review on June 20th, 2008, and again on April 10th, 2009. And the BAR gave generally positive comments and directed the applicant to return for preliminary approval after project approval by the PC. The project can be considered exempt from CEQA pursuant to guidelines section 15303C. Staff did review and analyze the exceptions to the exemptions, but in this case, we determined that they do not apply. As conditioned, the project is consistent with the comprehensive plan, including the coastal land use plan, the Goleta community plan, and the Isla Vista master plan, and is also consistent with the Article 2 zoning requirements with approval of the requested modification. Staff's recommendation is to adopt the required findings for the project, including findings for modifications to the ordinance standards for setbacks and the CEQA findings, to accept the exemption pursuant to 15303 of the state CEQA guidelines, and finally to approve the project, including a modification to reduce the rear yard setback from 5 feet to the required, to 5 feet from the required 10 feet, subject to the conditions of approval.
Thank you. I'll ask my fellow commissioners for ex parte and site visits and then questions of the staff. Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. I made my site visit today at 8 a.m. this morning, and I want to thank staff for the presentation, but I also want to commend the property owner. Actually, I want to commend whoever is out in Isla Vista, at least yesterday, because I did not see one piece of litter as I drove around these neighborhoods. I mean, it looked good. I mean, there have been times I've been through Isla Vista and I think, well, maybe I don't want to go back there anymore. But I have to say this morning, somebody is hard at work, and I did get to see the new roadway, I guess the new work on Pardell Road. Looks very nice, but I think the market looked good. I really don't have any questions. The idea, I'm glad to see that it's kind of there's manpower at this. I was envisioning people just tossing in their recyclables, but that's certainly not the case. And I think I was wondering about the noise. I see that there is some mitigation as far as the time use, and it looked good.
Mr. Valencia.
I visited the site, Mr. Chair.
I also visited the site. No further questions of the staff. I'll ask if the applicant's here to make any presentation.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Peter Margolis. I represent Tomer Pacific. Aaron did a great job presenting for us. I don't really have much to put on top of that. I just want to apologize for us being there before we did get permitted. This happened way before I started with the company. There was a prior recycler there 10 years before that, and we were just asked by the property owner to come in and change out the previous recycler because he wasn't happy with the business. So we are trying to make it right now. We'd like to do whatever we can to help the community, because it is, I think, a need the community really does need. The closest one is a few miles away, and I think we've been well received so far, and we do try to keep it very clean and do our best out there with what we have. So I'd like to answer any questions you may have.
I think Commissioner Cooney has a question for you.
Just a question about staffing. Is it the case that someone's on site during the business hours of the day?
Correct. It's mandated by the state that there be one of our employees there 30 hours a week. But we have an employee there during open hours and usually half hour before, half hour afterwards to clean up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I'll ask if anybody wishes to speak on this from the audience. I see no slips, no one raising their hand. Bring it back to commission for deliberations and a motion. This is a third district item. Do you want to lead?
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. As I said, I see no problems with this. I think the time reference is good. I like the idea that the landscaping will be added and the hedging, and we'll screen it a bit more. I'd like to just go ahead and make a motion.
Please do.
We are ready? Okay. I'd like to move that we adopt the required findings for this project, including the modifications for the setback and CEQA findings, that we accept the exemption that was mentioned pursuant to Section 15303, the state guidelines, and that we approve the project, including the modification to reduce the rear yard setback to 5 feet from the required 10 feet, subject to the conditions.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Ms. Oplin.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Okay, let's set up for, let's take a short break to set up for number 4. No, Commissioner Valencia seconded it. For us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of James Malott, Lucinda Malott, and Carl Nanker, appellants, to consider the following: 09 APL1, filed on January 5th, 2009, 09 APL5, filed on February 23rd, 2009, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Sections 15301E and 15305A of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you. And ex parte and site visits. Commissioner Brown.
I visited the site yesterday, and I have spoken with Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Commissioner Valencia.
I visited the site, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, I visited the site.
Commissioner Cooney.
I have had no ex parte communications, but I did thoroughly visit the site.
And for myself, this is another one I Googled, and by the way, this one you can get views from every street, look at every house, turn it upside down and around, so I am very familiar with it. So, having said that, we'll go for the staff report. Is it Ms. Clark? Great.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Planning Commissioners. I'm Sarah Clark, and I'll be presenting staff's recommendation for this project. The project before you today is an appeal of a zoning administrator decision to approve a modification for a rear yard setback encroachment and the follow-on coastal development permit. The proposed project is located at 2200 Banner Avenue, which is at the corner of Evans Avenue and Banner Avenue in the Summerlin area. Here's an aerial view of the site and the subject parcel. The parcel is accessed by a small driveway that extends from the corner of Evans and Banner. This parcel is located in the Summerlin Community Plan within the coastal zone, and it is a 0.07 acre parcel that's zone 10R2. The applicant is requesting a 4-foot rear yard setback encroachment to accommodate construction of a 360.6 square foot second story addition. The applicant is also proposing an 82.2 square foot first story addition. The project includes demolition of an unpermitted shed and removal of an unpermitted spa that are located currently in the rear yard setback, and conversion of the existing habitable garage back into its originally permitted configuration as a carport. So existing development on the site includes a 754 square foot single family dwelling, a 260 square foot garage, carport, excuse me, which was converted at some point to a garage and then into habitable space. And we have an unpermitted storage shed located in the rear yard setback, and there is that spa. For reference, the property line is shown here in green. You can see that the garage and some of the landscaping encroach significantly into the right-of-way. Because the residence and carport were constructed across the property line, these structures are legal nonconforming. The applicant is proposing to demolish the unpermitted shed and spa and construct a 360.6 square foot second story addition and an 82.2 square foot first story addition. The existing residence will remain in the garage, and the garage will be converted back to its permanent configuration as a carport. So here are the proposed north and south elevations of the project. The north elevation is what would face the appellant's property, the Nanker property, and the south elevation would face Banner Avenue. And then here are the east and west elevations. The west elevation would face Evans Avenue, and the east elevation would face the property next door to it. To give you a little background on the development of this parcel, the residence and the carport were constructed in approximately 1948. County records for these permits and this construction are a little bit sketchy given their age. And while county records indicate that this development was permitted, the records do not indicate exactly where on the parcel these structures were located or were to be located. As we've discussed, the carport was constructed across the property line, and the carport and residence were built largely within the currently required setback areas, both front and rear yard setbacks. And then in 1982, a master bedroom addition was permitted, and that was located also in the rear yard setback. The present project originally came in for the BAR process in 2007. Conceptual SBAR was noticed on October 9th of 2007, and the first conceptual review was on October 19th. Records indicate that mailed notice was sent to the appellant, Mrs. Nantker. The modification and CDP applications were received on April 21st of 2008, and October 24th, the project received preliminary SBAR approval. The ZA hearing was first noticed on November 5th, and because there was a typo in these notices, at the time it was dropped from that agenda, and the project was re-noticed, both by mail and in the Daily Sound. The project returned to the ZA on December 1st and was continued to the December 15th hearing, where it was then approved. The appellant has cited several grounds for appeal of this project, the first being improper noticing of the SBAR, zoning administrator, public works, and Summerlin BAR decisions. As I just discussed, the BAR was noticed at the conceptual level. From that point is the responsibility of any interested party to follow the agendas, either in print or online, to determine when the project will return. All ZA hearings were noticed 10 days in advance as required by ordinance, and our records do indicate that Ms. Nantker was mailed notice. The decision to approve a road encroachment permit is not something that is noticed or appealable, and the Summerlin Community BAR is not affiliated with the county, and we don't have any jurisdiction over their noticing procedures. The appellant also argues that because the existing encroachments effectively enlarge the parcel, adding the additional requested square footage as a first-story addition would not limit the applicant's usable yard area. Despite the road encroachments, however, any new development on the site is still limited by the parcel boundaries. This is a very small parcel that has 2 required front setbacks, so any further development on the first floor would require a variance. The appellant argues that the existing parcel configuration poses a threat to public safety by limiting visibility and restricting on-street parking. He also takes issue with the lack of on-site parking. The existing parking configuration is permitted and is non-conforming. Article 2 requires 2 on-site non-tandem parking spaces. The existing permitted parking configuration consists of the carport and the driveway space behind it, both of which encroach into the right-of-way. So although this is tandem parking, it does fulfill the 2-space requirement. And because the changes proposed to the existing development on the site do not impact the number of required parking spaces, and the applicant is not proposing any changes to the permitted parking configuration, no new parking configuration is required at this time, and they may maintain their legal non-conforming parking situation. Additionally, Public Works has reviewed the encroachment of the garage and associated structures into the right-of-way, and they've issued a road encroachment permit. In so doing, they evaluate any potential risks to public safety, and they found none in this case. One of the applicant's primary arguments is that, or one of the appellant's primary arguments is that the addition of a second story to the Tracy residence is not in keeping with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. He argues that all of the houses in the so-called swale area are single story, and that the second story would block views to the ocean from Evans Avenue. So in response to these claims, the view blockage from Evans Avenue, which I will discuss a little bit more later on, is limited to a very brief window for cars traveling south along Evans Avenue, and this window of view blockage is largely already obstructed by existing trees and vegetation. Additionally, SBAR has reviewed the proposed project. In granting their preliminary approval, they made the finding that the proposed structure was in conformance with the scale and character of the existing community. The surrounding neighborhood is a mixture of 1- and 2-story structures. So I went and did a neighborhood study to evaluate the character of the neighborhood and to see what the mixture of 1- and 2-story structures was, and so I'm going to show that now. Here in green you can see the Tracy residence, and then behind it you can see the appellant's residence, the Nantker residence. Both of these residences are currently 1-story structures. So here shown in blue are additional 1-story structures in the surrounding neighborhood, and the structures that are shown here in this sort of aqua light blue color are split level structures that are generally constructed into a hillside and appear to be 2-story structures from the street, or they are 1.5-story structures with maybe a partial second story with a sloped roof. And then these structures shown in red are 2-story structures. So I'd just like to point out for reference that the structures that are located here down towards the bottom these are generally commercial buildings right here, and several of these buildings, these ones right here, our condominium or apartment development, as is this large building up here. Finally, the appellant claims that the proposed addition would cause harm to the Nantker property located directly to the north by blocking ocean views and presenting a reflective slate roofing material. In response to that, private views are not currently protected by our policies, and the SBAR has reviewed and approved the project, which includes the approval of the roofing material. The project is consistent with the requirements of the Coastal Land Use Plan and the Summerlin Community Plan. In urban areas, structures must conform to the scale and character of the existing community, and new development must be compatible with and enhance the characteristics of the community's architecture. So as discussed, the project has received SBAR approval, which required a finding of neighborhood compatibility, and the surrounding neighborhood, as we just saw, contains a mixture of 1- and 2-story structures. The Summerlin Community Plan also prohibits new encroachments into the road rights-of-way. The road encroachments, however, on this site are existing, and in the case of the carport, that's an historic permitted encroachment. And as I'm going to show you in some photos coming up here, the existing encroachments on the site are in line with encroachments that are occurring on every other property that is along both Banner and Evans Avenue. So here is a view looking up Banner Avenue from Evans. You can see here with the fence and the low garden wall here, this is the subject parcel, the Tracy parcel. If you look up the street here, you'll notice that every other parcel along this street is encroaching with either landscaping or small similar wall-type structures into the right-of-way to the same extent. Cars do still freely park along here. During the course of my site visit, I did observe a car parked in this area in front of the Tracy property. So this is not currently restricting the availability of on-site parking. So here is a view from Evans Avenue of the Tracy residence, which you can see right here. And then this is a retaining wall here that's holding back the earth to preserve the carport and the residence below. So you can see where that encroaches into the right-of-way. This is the entrance to the Nantker property, their driveway. And this is taken again looking south, but if you go a bit further up, again, parking is here. And these high shrubbery, this landscaping is in line with the Tracy residence and where their property encroaches to. And then if you look north along Evans Avenue, again, all of the properties along here have landscaping and in some cases smaller structures that encroach to the same extent into the right-of-way. So the next issue we're going to discuss is public views. The Summerlin Community Plan protects public views from Summerlin to the ocean, and where practical, recommends protection of private views as well. But however, as we've discussed before, there's no other option for expanding the existing residence that would not require a variance. And so in this case, we felt that it was not practical to avoid a second-story addition in this circumstance. Additionally, view blockage from Evans Avenue is very minimal. So here's that photo again of the residence as it is seen from Evans Avenue and from where a car would be traveling south on Evans Avenue. You can see the ocean really is just barely visible from here. There's the ocean horizon, which in this area is pretty much completely blocked by vegetation. This is sort of a rough approximation of where the addition on the Tracy residence would be. So as you can see from this photo, there isn't really any substantial ocean view blockage from this site. Additionally, the proposed addition is consistent with all ordinance requirements. The existing structures on the site are legal nonconforming. All changes proposed to these structures are consistent with the current ordinance requirements with approval of this modification to coastal development permit. The garage will be converted back to a carport and the unpermitted shed and spa will be removed. The applicant will continue to provide 2 parking spaces in their permitted location configuration. The residence is proposed to be 20.9 feet high, which is below the 22-foot height limit for the Summerlin urban area. In conclusion, this project, or this appeal, is based largely on issues of private view blockage and over which we don't really have purview. So staff's recommendation is to adopt the required findings for approval, deny the appeals, and approve the project.
Thank you. And I just have one question. The appeal was filed sometime after December 15th, I assume within 10 days?
Yes.
And it's now May the 6th. Is that the normal time for an appeal to get to the commission?
We try to bring them forward as soon as possible. Unfortunately, my workload prevented me from getting this particular project before now,
Okay.
so.
I'm always curious. I'm just real conscious of time when we get an approval and then people have to wait around 4 more months to figure out that, to perfect their approval if that's the case, or be denied. Okay, thank you. I don't see the lights on for staff for questions from the commission, so we'll have from the appellant now, which is Mr. Malott, is that correct?
Malott.
Malott. Thank you.
My name is Jim Malott. I'm an architect. I live in Tiburon, California. My mother is the owner of the property here, the Nantker property, and she passed away on April 4th. So we are now the owners, my sister and I. Our issue is the same as though my mother was still living there. We feel the stress of this may have hastened her demise, but we can't prove that. This appeal is about a project that wouldn't be before you if proper process had been followed. Our concern is that, and our concern is, yes, our project, our home, is being damaged more than anybody else in the neighborhood. The damage to our home is, as Sarah Clark expressed, a view blockage issue, as well as a reflective issue of a brightly colored blue metal roof, which is reflective. We also feel there's substantial damage to the neighborhood character in that the buildings in this swale, and if I may have back your site, aerial site plan. I think this is, yes. If I may, whoops, yes, sorry. What Sarah explained was correct, but what she left out was equally correct. And frankly, one of the problems we have with the presentation of the staff work here throughout this process has been that where things are supportive of the staff position and the planning department, they are mentioned. Where they're not supportive, they're not mentioned. So we feel that there's been an inequity here. One of those inequities consists of the topography in this area. If you'll follow the pen here, if I may, I'm not sure there, it seems to be losing its juice or something. This is the Tracy residence, and this area from right here wrapped around in an oval, encompassing all of these blue homes, is a swale. In other words, it's a valley. The valley actually extends back up here. All of these houses shown in red are actually on the sides of that valley. Therefore, they're on hillsides. They constitute a totally different topography than this area, which consists of a very low slope, approximately 10 feet between properties downhill, whereas these may have slopes of 20, 30 feet. In other words, the base floor area of this house is probably 25 feet above the Tracy residence. This one's probably 40 feet above the Tracy residence. This one's probably 20 feet above the Tracy residence. The Nantker residence is 9 feet above the Tracy residence. So a second story here is much different than a second story on all of these ridges and hillsides here. And that constitutes one of the problems. It also creates a certain quality in this little swale area here that is important. It's a neighborhood almost within a neighborhood. It is a little valley, and it has virtually the same houses everywhere. So the damage to the neighborhood character is there. And if you allow a second story here, then each of these other houses will probably seek the same solution in the near future. If we could go to one of my site plans, I apologize for not having a PowerPoint presentation, but I would like to provide you with a plat map, if I may. The white area on that plat is obviously the house. It's to scale, 1/4 of an inch to the foot.
Actually, I think we can put it up on the board up there. We
I'd
can
be
see
happy
it
to
from
do
there.
that.
He can point to it with a pointer then. The staff will do it for you, thanks.
If you could put it the opposite way up, I'd appreciate it. What Sarah Clark pointed out to you was that there is parking along Banner Avenue here. Seldom do cars park in this area for a very good reason. One is the road narrows at the mouth of Banner Avenue, and secondly, there is a retaining wall on the Tracy property right at the edge of this green area. It's about 2 feet high, on top of which there's a 5-foot-high fence. That creates a level yard out of everything within the green zone here. It's virtually a level site. This retaining wall here does about the same thing, and it too is a retaining wall on top of which is a 5-foot wood wall covered with ivy that adds another 2 feet in height to it. So the constructive height here is 7 feet, then the constructive height here is, again having a problem with this, the constructive site on the bottom here is 7 feet also. So from the inside, it looks like a 5-foot-high fence. From the outside, it's a 7-foot fence. And furthermore, because there is a retaining wall here, you can't park right next to a retaining wall and open your car doors. So you actually have to park 2 feet out into the street. And that's substantially different. And one of the reasons no cars, in my recollection, have been parking along the Evans Avenue, that's the north-south vertical line there. And very few cars park along this area for the same reason. They park instead in front of the Rhodes property next door. And that means that, for all intents and purposes, 6 or 7 parking spaces are, or 5 or 6, depending on how you're counting, are eliminated from this area. Furthermore, the Tracy property is required by having the garage in this location or carport in this location and parking here to back out into the intersection. And I have watched as they have backed out occasionally, and cars come over this rise up above here, and they're within striking distance of it. It's only a matter of time, I think, before you're going to end up with an accident. I believe that's today it would never be approved as a corner access to a driveway, to a parking area. So the damage to the public safety is there. Contrary to what Ms. Clark said, the parking up here actually is indented this dimension. So there is parking in this area. You saw a truck in her photographs parked right about here, opposite the Nantker area. So there's another 10 feet setback here before landscaping occurs in this area, and up in the area above that, in front of the apartment house, there's actually a hedge that's been pruned back recently there too. There is damage if this project is built, I believe, to the neighborhood view coming down here. It's only a matter of maybe 3 to 5 seconds, and I agree with Mrs. Clark. She said 1 second. That's a little excessive. It lasts longer than that. But it is the only ocean view in this area because of the limited ability to see over the trees down below. The final thing I'd like to point out at this point is this dark green area. That's all public area on the south and west sides. And this area up here is actually owned by Nantker, although it's being landscaped by Tracy because they just sort of put some fences up there and started planting plants. This area down here, though, is over 2,100 square feet, and that combined with the light green area, which is 3,000 square feet, makes about a 5,100 square foot lot. The Tracys are giving as a reason for building a second story here that they will lose their yard area if they put it down below. Well, with the exception of the area they're already proposing to build out in here, a master suite and bath, the same size as the one above, fits comfortably in here within its setbacks And as to it requiring variances, the Rhodes residence right next door has received those variances as of 1994. This is a copy of the Rhodes variances. And in that there's precedent for a single floor solution on the adjacent property, I suspect it would be more than simple to make similar exceptions on this property. That was never mentioned by the planning staff as an option. Indeed, the architect for the project, who was also the architect for the Rhodes project, seems to have forced this second-story solution. And then the final point, he has concealed actively the process by which he has been getting approvals for this. And I'll go through those in a moment. But the one thing that we should point out while we're still talking about this area here is this is effectively fenced-off private land now. It's by what I believe is an unlawful taking of public land for private use. And yes, other people have landscaped into this area. To my knowledge, and the photographs support it, nobody has fenced right to the boundary of that property and sort of made it their own inside their property area. So none of the public can use or enjoy this area inside the fence here nor here. That's different from all of the other encroachments into public rights of way which are in that area. The Tracy residence should never have come before you, and it wouldn't have been here if not for the failure of the Planning Department, the Summerlin Board of Architectural Review, and the active concealment of the planning process by the applicant's architect, who has admitted such in this room about several months ago. The failure to notice by the Planning Department, I think, is the most serious. The Planning Department did give us notice in 2007, October of 2007, of a hearing on this property. The policy, as stated on page 6 of their current the planning staff review, and since the pages aren't numbered, it's the third page back on the inside under project analysis, section 6.2. The bottom line states, notice of the next hearing is given during the first hearing. No additional notice for continued hearings is required. Well, that may be the policy, but in this case, it went on 10 months before they had the next hearing, which in all of the consultation I've had with lawyers and others means that there was no notice, effectively, of what amounted to a second hearing of this project. And had it been continued and continued and continued actively, it would have been one thing. It was not continued. It was merely put aside and then brought back with a redesign, minor redesign, 10 months later. At the same time, the applicant's architect, realizing he had a problem, went to Department of Public Works and obtained with a single signature an approval by DPW for encroachment of the carport into the public right-of-way. Now, I'm an architect. I understand that encroachments are necessary sometimes for various things, one of which is for parking or other related uses. But in this case, there is no permit, nor is there anything in any document about the retaining walls, the fences, the encroachment by the property into the public right-of-way, as much as 19 feet on one side and 15 feet on the other. It's a major encroachment. It's not just a little encroachment, it's a lot of encroachment. When we were at the first hearing in October of 2007 in this room before the South County DRB, we requested of the Planning Department staff member at that time, the Summerland DRB representative who was here, and the architect for the applicant, we asked all of them, please to give us notice when there was to be any additional hearing on the property. We received no notice from the planning department staff, no notice from the Summerlin DRB, and certainly no notice from the architect, who actually claimed, again, about December of this year, that it would have been cutting his own throat, he said. That was his attitude. Not that it was fair or reasonable under the circumstances, not that we were the most affected parties under the circumstances, but that he wanted to get this through at all costs. The final point in this area is there has been a radical change apparently since we've made this appeal in the planning department's attitude towards notice. For one thing, I get notice of everything that the whole county is doing now. Not just the planning department, but I get the public works department and everything, all emailed. So it works when you want it to work. It just didn't work until December of this year, or January. Second thing is, item 6 on your agenda today is about noticing. And you're going to hear a lot more about this, I suspect. It's a big issue. It's a serious issue. And when an affected party is not noticed, it's a legal issue. It's also unfair in the most extreme sense of the word. If you can't present a reasonable case for your side of it and have it heard reasonably before a public body, it's not democracy. That's what happens in camera in other countries, not in the United States, and certainly not here. This is one of the most environmentally sensitive areas in the country, and yet, Mrs. Nanker, we were never notified after this first hearing in October. And we did call. I called the architect twice. No, nothing's happening. That's subterfuge.
It sounds like you're coming close to conclusion.
I have a couple more items, sir.
Okay.
We have had a situation on the Nanker property that I want to bring up as another issue of fairness and what I consider to be somewhat biased on the part of the planning staff. Mrs. Nanker had a garage right here at the corner of her property. And that garage was required to be torn down by the planning department when she sought actually a re-subdivision of this property. It turns out the house was built a few feet too close to the property line and an eave projected over the property line, so we had to re-subdivide this area. But in that process, the county required that this garage be torn down. Now, the garage was completely on Mrs. Nanker's property. It had a 5 or 7 foot side yard setback. It only had a 1 foot front yard setback. But it was required to be torn down. Now, it's also a parking structure. It also, in normal circumstances, could actually encroach over into the public right-of-way, as the Tracy carport does, by 9 feet at one point, I believe, 7.5 feet at another point. So we're asking for fairness on this. If you're going to force us to tear down our garage, which you did, we want you to tear down the Tracy carport. You know, it's only fair. Or at least give us a reasonable hearing and allow us to propose to the Tracys that a single-story solution on this property is imminently feasible, can be varianced per the road's precedent, and is easier to do and will cost half as much. I'm an architect. Ground floor solution is much easier than building a second story on top of this building, which has no foundation, no seismic bracing for a second story, and so forth. It's a huge, much different order of magnitude project. I'll stop there, but I would like to reserve the right to respond to anything else that's said here. And I do have photographs to show that I believe better indicate the photographs that you received in the packet this morning. Mr. Smith showed 2 photographs of hand-drawn elements. There are no story poles to verify the height of those elements. I believe they are several feet underneath what the actual mass of that building is, so I distrust those photographs. I also know that he took the photographs, I can tell by the angle of vegetation and the roof. One of the photographs was taken in a crouching position to allow foreground vegetation to conceal the actual mass of the Tracy project. So with that, I will release the lectern, or
Thank you.
answer any questions if you have them.
I don't see any questions right now, thanks.
May I speak?
After that? Okay. Yeah, your comments brief, I would hope, and not repetitive of the earlier comments?
I hope not. My name's Lucinda Malott. I'm Carol Nanker's daughter. This is a very complicated issue. I don't know if you have had time to read our appeal letter. I hope you have. I don't know if you've had time to go up and take a look at this site, but I hope you have. 140 Evans Avenue has been in our family since mid-1970s. It was purchased, and I lived in it for several years. My mother's lived in it the last 6 years. It was rented for a time in between there. There's a house, there's a patio, there's a pool, there's a big terrace in the front. It's a very lovely living space, and it's always been sort of a private space from the standpoint of people in front of us, because their houses were one story and they didn't encroach upon our living area. This second story proposal is going to be very intrusive into our privacy and into our use of our recreational space. The Rhodes residents next door to the Tracys proposed a second story also, which we fought years ago when it was first proposed with Mr. Smith, the architect, and the solution was reached to put a one ground floor addition for what they were asking, and it's a very attractive. The cottage look remains. This is a cottage area, one story, lovely little sort of Carmel feeling kind of area in this swale, and that was preserved when the Rhodes built their one-story addition. For all the reasons that should have been defeated and was, this should have been defeated. And again, we would not have failed to show up if we had known about this middle of the year, this 10-month later meeting, which we are supposed to have been keeping track of from Tiburon somehow. We did ask at the first hearing in October of '07 to be notified by email or phone or whatever by several different people. We were assured that would happen. It didn't happen. So we missed a very major meeting because we missed a major hearing because there was no notice given to us. We would have been here, and we would have been here with our proposals and our ideas and what we objected to, and it would have at least been some input. But as it was, there was no input. All this was done without our knowledge. The Tracy Cottage, I mean, I've lived above the Tracy Cottage, and I've seen it progress through the years with any number of violations. It was a little tiny house, and it has had this carport, which, by the way, they keep telling you is permitted. We have looked for the permits for this. We cannot find them. There are no permits for the carport that we've been able to come up with. If they can come up with it, fine, but we have looked through the archives. There's no permit for this for this carport. It was turned into a garage, and now it's a master bedroom. Somehow along the line, it turned into living space. It's also built over their property line, which everybody says, oh, that doesn't matter. Well, our carport wasn't, our garage wasn't built over any property line, and we had to take it down. So there's a lot of unfairness here, it seems to me. There are other violations on this property. They've put in a spa, they've put in these fences along they've grabbed land. They've created a very lovely place. I like how it looks, but it's not legal, and it shouldn't be permitted. And they shouldn't be rewarded with allowing to do a second story when they have all these violations already. And in fact, as Mr. Malott has shown you, or he can show you on his map up there, that there is a very easy way to put the square footage that they need on the ground floor, as was done with the Rhodes property. There also,
I hate to just, I'm sorry to do this to you, but as the appellant, you're allowed to make one presentation. I don't need to have two presentations that are identical, and so far you haven't said much different than I
Well-
think that your brother did. So unless you have something new to add to what he's already said, I think you as the appellant have had the opportunity to state your case. Thanks. And you will have a chance to rebut once the applicant has his case. I think now we want to hear from the applicant. And I do have two speaker slips when that's concluded, and then we'll have the appellant make the rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you, Planning Commission members, for hearing the appeal and rebuttal today. My name is Tom Smith. I'm the architect for Reed and Christina Tracy, the owners of the property 2200 Banner Avenue. I'm not going to try and belabor a lot of things. You've heard quite a bit of information. However, I've got to say for the record that I'm not at all pleased to find out that I'm being accused of involuntary manslaughter and conspiracy, but apparently that's what's happened here. But going aside from there, all the information that you folks have received here all goes down to just one or two crucial cardinal points, and that is the appellants would not have even been saying anything or asking about or talking about encroachments into the county right of way along Evans or Banner, solely because of the second floor blocks part of their view. Now, I was the architect also for a project for Hazel and Peter Rhodes, and Hazel was hoping to be here to speak, and there was a speaker slip filled out for her, but she is not able to make it. However, she did write a letter to the same effect of her support of the property. In the case of the Rhodes' property, it wasn't really apparent from down below originally how much that a second floor would have impacted Mrs. Nanker's property. When we went through the process, I was able to come up. I was invited to come up and have a look, and I was able to get on the property at the south end of the Nanker house, which has a covered porch and a pair of sliding glass doors. And indeed, the Rhodes' property would have sat right square in front of them, and that was pretty much a no-brainer at that point. It's like, okay, well, we're going to have to go with one story. This house for the Tracys sits at the opposite end. It's at the opposite end of the property from theirs. It does not project above the ridgeline of the adjacent hills. We have designed it to minimize as much as possible any impact it have on that property, and it certainly preserves their privacy because there's no windows that look over there as well. The whole thing boils down to they want to have an absolute unobstructed view running from probably, well, certainly more, not 180, but certainly a lot more than 90 degrees, say about 135 degree sweep. And this sits off on the side, and I've submitted some photographs. By the way, when I took the photographs, I was not crouching. I was standing up. And photograph number 3 actually shows story poles that were erected on the property, contrary to what Mr. Malott has said. There is no land grab going on here. The property, we researched it. There was the permit record is spotty, to be certain. But the information we found came through the tax assessor's office with the information that they have for property tax purposes, and that's where we saw where this carport used to be. And the Tracys never converted the thing into habitable space. The Tracys never built these fences that do this land grab that they talk about. This was all a previous owner. Instead of, and there's not a lot of, we're just trying to get the carport back in its usable place. We've already seen from the beginning that it obviously can't be habitable space. It's ridiculous because the thing most of it extends over into the right-of-way. That's why we got the road encroachment permit. That's why we're putting it back to being a carport. In the end, in this neighborhood that's described in the map, the appellant owns the largest property in that limited area. The Tracy's own the smallest property that's in that area. They want to preserve a private benefit. The largest property owner wants to preserve a major benefit at the expense of the smallest property owner. And the Tracy's want to have that second floor addition. It's not just open space for the kids. They want to have a second floor. And anything else done on the first floor is going to require a variance, and I've already been assured by planning staff any number of times that a variance would not be supportable. So we have to go up. And we're just trying to do it in a way that's going to impact them the least. That's it.
Thank you. I do have one question for you. and
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Cunha does too. The issue of the blue reflective roof, is that?
I brought a sample with me if it's the pleasure of the commission for me to display it.
It would be mine,
All
because
right.
that's the one thing that I might like to look at.
Mr. Chair, so that both the applicant and the appellant can address an issue that we want to raise with the commission, I think I'd like to ask Rachel to discuss an issue with the modification proposal and allow the applicant and the appellant to discuss it.
Great. If we could have someone pick up that sample, we'll pass it around while Rachel is doing just that.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Ms. Black is going to hand out a section of Article 2 to you that I wanted you to have the actual language of the modifications to look at when we talk about this issue. So I'll just wait until she gets that to you. But the section I want to point out is actually, it's section 179.2 3A. So I don't know if it's going to be on there. It's page 334.
Oh.
It might be on the back.
There you go.
And this issue is addressed on page A13 of your staff report. So the Article 2 says that modifications may only be granted in conjunction with a specific development proposal and are limited to all of the following. And subsection A talks about the total area of the setback area not being reduced more than 20%. And the reductions are addressed in your staff report. And I'm concerned about the percentages with this particular project and the language of the code, which is why I wanted you to have it. And I'd be happy to address any questions.
So I think what we need to do is make the calculation for us to tell us what percentage we are encroaching at this point.
Well, right now, the existing house and the carport take up more than 20% of the existing setback area. And then the addition is increasing that 2.9%. I don't have the percentage in the staff report of what's existing in the setback area is actually also includes the unpermitted structures, so it's a little bit higher if you take out the unpermitted structures, or a little bit lower than the percentage that's given. Does that make sense? But it's still
you're
over
going to put that in
20%.
real plain English. Is that what you're going to do?
Mr. Chair, I think the fundamental issue is the site as it's currently developed with the non-conforming structures in the setbacks already exceeds the 20% coverage. So in order to consider this modification consistent with the code, your commission would have to interpret that the legal non-conforming portion of the structure doesn't count against this 20% yard coverage issue in the modification. That's what you would have to define. And the code is not, it doesn't address that one way or the other.
Yeah, because are you saying that this code was adopted after the property had been constructed? Yeah, it gets to my...
Well, it's legal non-conforming.
It's legal non-conforming.
Right.
The current situation is legal non-conforming as to yard coverage and location within the
Gets to my whole point with this legal non-conforming on the Santa Ynez Valley plan, as we were talking the other day. So Commissioner Cooney has a question.
Did you want to finish?
Well, I just had,
I'm
one
sorry, I
more
thought you
thing
were-
to add to that. No, your question made me think of it. So if you're looking at the staff report on A13, it also quotes section 35-1621 of Article 2, which talks about doing an expansion to a legal non-conforming structure. And a non-conforming structure may be enlarged, provided that the enlargement or extension complies with setback height. So in order to enlarge a non-conforming structure, in this case, we need the modification to change the setback. So I just wanted to make sure that the interplay was clear.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooney.
All right, I'm back to my question of Mr. Smith, and I had the same question Commissioner Blau did with regard to the reflective nature of the roof. It's a little difficult to tell from the sample exactly how much sunlight at the appropriate time of the day would get reflected back. Do you have any view to share with us on that?
I'm afraid I don't. I know when we were trying to select the material, we wanted to have a metal roof, and we wanted the blue to kind of have it blend with the, at least with the air of the horizon line. And it was the intent of both SBAR and the Summerland Association was to try and get it a matte finish. That was the matte finish that I was able to get from the manufacturer. If there's a way of making it more matte, we're certainly in favor of it, because the last thing we want to do is to have sunlight bouncing off the thing and causing some glare. That would be counterproductive to everything we wanted to try.
All right. Well, I think that's a concern I share of his, so that's an issue to be left. And you did address the other concern I had regarding privacy raised by Ms. Malat, and that is the second-story addition has been designed with no windows or doors facing directly to their residence. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the noticing and the issue by the appellant that there was the one notice for the meeting in October, and then voila, all of a sudden something happened in 10 months later. Ms. Clark, would you just explain to me that at that first meeting of the SBAR, which was for conceptual review, what happened? What did the SBAR do?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brown, I actually was not present at the first meeting of the SBAR. This is before the case had been assigned to me and come to me. It is my...
Are there minutes that reflect what happened?
There are minutes. I would need a moment to check for them.
Yeah,
but
please. I want to ask about that. Not yet. Well, let me just ask. That's a good question. Let me just ask a question of Mr. Smith. If you were to design a project that didn't need any mods, what would that mean?
I'm sorry, what?
If you were to design a project that didn't need any mods that are being requested via this project, what would that mean for your structure? For what you're going to do? Any idea?
Offhand for this structure, I think it means that we'd be limited to just interior remodel and, maybe changing some exterior surfaces.
Okay, fine. Okay, thank you.
Well, to follow up with that question, it seems to me the encroachment that's happening now is on the ground floor.
Yeah.
The fact that you added the second floor doesn't add to the encroachments. So it's the 62 feet of the ground floor that's causing council some concern.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry.
I think that's
yeah,
the answer
okay.
to your question.
Okay.
They could still do the two-story, they just couldn't add
Okay.
anything to the ground floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's what I mean. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Valencia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask a question. This is the property line for the Nantucker, and the roads is here. Where is the property line on this side?
The property line, let me see, this is the property line
Try
here.
using two hands because you're all over the place.
I'm sorry. Okay. This is the property line here.
Right through the garage, huh?
Right through the garage. Now, if I could just clarify something, as you travel from here toward Evans Avenue, what happens is this area here is flat. Here is a railroad tie retaining wall, which was originally there by the previous owner, which runs about 3 feet high or so. From here, the ground slopes upward very steeply to get to the shoulder of Evans Avenue, and it's right here that there's a 5-foot-high wood fence. There is no wholesale gouging out of everything here to create some kind of space. This is just all landscaped slope right in this region, right in through here.
Okay, let me continue with my question there,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, if I may, just for a second.
Please.
So if the property line is here, when you did this, you knew, or the people who built this knew they were in violation of going over the property line, going into public domain?
I can't get inside the head of whoever built the thing back
It
in
was done-
1948, but I would hope they would know. I know that accurately locating property lines in Old Town Summerlin is sometimes a lot more of an art than a science, according to Joe Levakian, my surveyor, because a lot of times the various landmarks they use are located on manhole covers, and then streets get repaved and covers get raised and moved, and
So
Yeah.
the process is kind of accepted because there weren't any real controls?
yes, sir.
All right. Is that the case, Ms. Black?
I have one question to follow up. It looks to me like this is a 60-foot right-of-way for Evans Avenue,
I believe so, yes.
which would, and if I'm correct, that would not be the normal right-of-way or road section for a small lot subdivision. Am I correct?
I would probably say you're correct, yes, sir.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's almost a candidate for where we deed back part of the right-of-way that we've been doing all over the county. Just a comment, you know.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, since you asked, and I think this might be helpful to answer the question about what could they and couldn't they do if they didn't require modification. So this lot is quite constrained, and I think I'm following the right lines, but Sarah, please correct me if I'm wrong. This is the setback line from here. So essentially, right here. The setback line from this property is here,
Yes.
and then the setback line from this property line, I believe, is here. So the way that they've designed the project, there isn't a further encroachment on the first floor. This is a second-story encroachment, and this is the area we're talking about right here, is my understanding.
Yeah, that cantilever's over on the second floor there.
So it's not a first floor encroachment, it's a second floor encroachment in this area. So that's what we're talking about in terms of the modification.
Thank you. I do have one public
Thank you.
speaker, Christina Tracy.
Hello, thank you. I don't have much to say. Obviously, we've heard everything 50 times. I just want to say this has been going on for almost 2 years. It's a small project. It's 360 square feet. It's a small house now. It's 700 and whatever square feet. It's not even going to be 1,200 square feet when it's done. It's a cute house, but it'll be cuter when it's done. We didn't do any of the stuff that happened years and years ago. We just bought it and moved in. We took out the spa when they said, you shouldn't have a spa. We'll take out that shed. I would have done it already, but they said, just wait till you remodel. And that's it. And I wish Hazel could have been here because she would have told you how disappointed she was having to build a one-story because she doesn't have a garden and she doesn't have a dog. And she was really upset with them and she really tried to fight them, but she didn't have the money and she's old and she let them win. And so I know she wishes she could say that. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Maylott, is your opportunity to rebut?
Mr. Chair, just as a matter of detail, I want to make sure Mr. Malat has the letter that we've received here from Hazel Rhodes dated May 5, 2009. If he doesn't, I want him to be able to look at it.
Great, and we'll afford you a minute or two to read it as well.
Thank you. Mr. Smith made the statement that we, the appellant, own the largest property, and that we're trying to get something at the expense of the Tracys, who own the smallest property. Well, in fact, it's the other way around. This is either the smallest or the second smallest property in this area, and they're attempting to take something from us. And it's something that we treasure, and it's something that your own code suggests should be saved if possible. Now, I've taken the liberty of using the Tracy residence as a starting point with their requirements for a master suite, and I drew a companion to this drawing which shows how a single-story addition might work on their property, and I'd like to show it to you. If you look at those two properties, they're diagrammed the same way as we previously discussed. The red line shows what the Tracy proposal is on the second story. That's this line here. That's actually what they are proposing to do in their plans. The white line right below it shows a 360 square foot addition, which is what they claim they're adding up above. In reality, it's 455 square feet because it has a stair, and it has a deck, and it has a larger area, a larger mass than the 360 square feet. The 360 square feet is the master bedroom and bath. This is 360 square feet on the ground floor. It works perfectly as to a single-story plan. It maintains this backyard area. It maintains this front yard area. The only thing that's lost is a 6-foot strip right along there and a 2-foot or 3-foot strip there. So it's not difficult from a planning or from a design standpoint to design a good addition to a house like this. It also has much less effect on everybody, on us, on the roads, on the street, on the character of the neighborhood. It has no effect at all, effectively, on anybody. Now, admittedly, the Tracys want a second story, but they want it at our expense. And your code says where possible, private views should be respected. That's your code. Where possible. So we're asking, since the Rhodes property next door has had a much greater variance than this one would require, why is it that the planning department has made this absolute statement that they cannot support a variance? Why not? What is it that has driven this project to be a second story? Is it the planning department itself? Is there a reason why variances can't be approved on this property and can be approved on the next door property for approximately the same square footage house? What is it that is forcing this to go this way, and why is it that the planning department has made such a great effort to support this project at the expense of an uphill neighbor? We believe
Commissioner Brown has a question for you.
Yes.
I'm not sure to whom to address this question, but if they were to do a first floor addition, how does that comport with the setback requirements as what is presented here? Maybe that's Ms. Clark to answer.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brown, it's sort of difficult for me to know right now. I can't see on here exactly where the setback line would be in terms of the front setback. It would depend on how far that area would encroach as to whether it was a variance or a modification. If they only did it, again, without seeing it, it's difficult for me to make that call at this point.
I could probably answer it. I mean, the existing house is already encroaching into the full setback, so any expansion of that whatsoever is going to increase the encroachment, yeah.
I agree.
Please continue.
Well, since that's the case, and since the encroachment has been approved next door, we don't understand why it can't be approved here and why it is that the planning department effectively is forcing this solution as part of the effort on behalf of the Tracys. We do appreciate the fact that you took time to look at that blue reflective roof, and frankly, if you go outside and look at it, it probably has about a 55 to 60% reflectance. That's my estimate. I'm an architect. That's what I would guess. In other words, it doesn't reflect 100%. It reflects about half. But in an area the size that they're talking about, with sunrise and sunset and the sun on the opposite side of that roof at all times for us, effectively it will cause visual distress on our part on a regular basis. We would seriously request that the roofing material be changed to a medium to dark value composition shingle or something equivalent to that, Class A obviously, that would have almost no reflectance. And we think that's anything colorful also detracts from the neighborhood. It doesn't have to be this bright blue reflective roof. We also sympathize with the code issues for the planning staff. It's such a complex code that I have a hard time understanding it myself. I think that all of the calculations are exceedingly complex to make, but I do know that common sense and wisdom would indicate that it's easier to build 360 square feet on the ground floor with a variance, because the next door neighbor has gotten a variance, than it is to build a second story that has all the negative effects that we have outlined. And we would request that the issue be referred back to proper hearing channels, that a single-story approach be suggested and explored, and that the staff look at it with regard to making a modification or making a variance as necessary to support it. The 66 square feet, by the way, is not a cantilever. It's supported with a post at the corner out there. So it's a structural addition. And with regard to deeding back part of the right-of-way, we'd love it. Can you give us some too? Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Valencia, please.
Mr. Talbot, as a result of this second addition on top, are they going to have a view from that? Is there a view?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a reason for it.
All right.
And it's a deck up there too.
Commissioner Brown.
A variance, explain to me about a variance.
Is this Commissioner?
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we'll bring it back to staff for questions from the commission to the staff. Commissioner Brown, did you wish to ask that question? Okay, she's going to answer it. Thanks.
You have findings. Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, the findings for a variance are different than the findings for a modification, and they relate to special circumstances applicable to the property, including size. That granting of a variance shall not constitute a grant of special privilege, and that it will not be in conflict with the intent and purpose of the zoning code. So there's certainly flexibility in granting a variance, but it's a very factual, it's a factually based finding, and it's certainly not something that's before you today, so I wouldn't necessarily suggest your commission.
No, I just didn't understand. I don't think I've ever seen it's just a variance request, a hearing, so I was unfamiliar with it. That's my reason for my question.
I'll just ask one question about the noticing issues. Clearly, as we get to item 6 today, we are working on doing better noticing so that people don't have this problem, but it seems to me that in this case, there's no harm, no foul, in that they were notified of the ZA hearing, but more importantly, they were notified of this hearing. And even if the ZA had to have turned it down and had the Board of Architecture review, it still could get back to this commission through an appeal process. So I think it's safe to say that no one was harmed by them not being able to attend those prior hearings, because ultimately this commission is going to make the determination, and for some reason there's disagreement. Am I correct on that issue?
Mr. Chair, I do think you're correct. It's difficult. There's a balance between providing public notice of every hearing that the commission and that another county body takes versus an efficient process. We've only recently, actually this afternoon, we'll be recommending that your commission notice BAR hearings consistently throughout the community. We have not been noticing all of our BAR hearings.
And to comment on that, there's no requirement in the law to notice BAR meetings like there's a requirement to notice this meeting. So we're doing that to try and be overboard about giving people the opportunity, but there's no legal requirement to do that.
Mr. Chair, I think that's correct. And one of the goals that we have in public notice is to provide the opportunity for people to comment and affect a project much earlier than this process, on appeal to the commission. So that's why we're making some of the suggestions that we're making this afternoon in terms of code requirements. But this project was
and we do that selfishly to try and avoid these kind of hearings, correct? Yes.
That's correct. We also have a system, and perhaps this is a system that the appellant was referring to, where people can receive automatic email notifications of issues that occur on their properties of interest, and that's something that we've put into place and have improved over the last period of time.
Yeah. Commissioner Brown has a question.
In the Summerlin area, is it my understanding that they, unlike other areas in the county, they always received conceptual BAR noticing? Unlike some areas which don't receive it, so.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, that's correct. The very first hearing is notified, is noticed.
Okay, so they enjoy a heightened noticing above and beyond what other areas of the county receive?
Yes, that's correct.
Great. Commissioner Cooney, this is a first district item. How would you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I have a lot of comments and thoughts about the project, and in particular the personal nature of the dispute, but I will save those and defer to my fellow commissioners for their comments first.
Mr. Brown.
One thing I would like to do is go outside and look at the roof material to see its reflective nature, if that's possible. I don't know what we're going to do for break or lunch, but that would be one thing I'd like to do.
Well, my thought on that has to do with the direction in which this goes, but it's my feeling at this point that the roof material does need to be addressed, but I'm not prepared to substitute my judgment for the Summerlin Community Design Board, and if they had an instruction, or if our BAR had an instruction from us to address the roof treatment in terms of reflectivity, I'd feel a lot more comfortable. I mean, if it's 55% or 80% or 30%, I just am not going to be able to tell by looking at it. I do know from a metal roof in my neighborhood that they can be reflective and distressing during certain times of the day.
Commissioner Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Commissioner Cooney. Driving into Summerlin, everything looks like it's non-conforming. It looks like it was made without any regard to rules and regulations many, many years ago, and everybody did the best they could. And looking at this plan, that's why I asked about the property line. And if you were to enforce this and go back and straighten this out, you would redo the entire community, and you would be in courts for the rest of your lives, you know. And I wonder sometimes how some of them manage to park their cars. But going back to, many of the homes there have views, beautiful views. Not all of them, but many of them have views. And why is this property owner not equal to those other people? If he wants to have a view, those other people, many of them, have views with second stories. And I feel that this property owner has that right to have that view. And so, based on the addition is within the center of the lot, not on the ends, I feel it would be appropriate to go forward with this. When they complained about taking down their garage that the county asked them to take, well, that garage was on a zero lot line. It was right on the line, and I can understand that. Had it been moved back some distance, maybe they could have made a special dispensation for them. But I think people are, based on the way the development is in the entire area, I think they're entitled to have a view if they want to. It's not imposing. It's in the center of the lot, right in the middle, on top of their house, so I don't have any problem with it. Thank you.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. I, like Commissioner Valencia, I had never been beyond Lily Avenue in Summerlin, so it was quite interesting to drive up Evans Avenue and to see the variety of housing units there. I was driving my larger car, and it was most difficult to turn around. I think I had to do a 5-point turn rather than a 3-point turn. I'm looking at the size of the house that's proposed with the second floor and the changes made, and we're still coming in at, I have 1,196 square feet, so it's not what I would call, the McMansions that we see, going up in many neighborhoods. As you look at the location, is there any other place, that would protect the view from the Nanker property? I don't know if it can be done. It seems as if, all the ordinances are, that the plans are consistent with all the existing ordinances. I think perhaps the roofing material might get a second look from BAR. It's very tight in there, but, I don't know if there are any conditions that we can look at, to solve this neighborhood problem. But, if it follows the ordinances, I guess that's where I would go with it.
Commissioner Brown.
Okay, thank you. Private views are always a concern, and this commission has heard other appeals that affect private views. And I believe that even the BAR is always concerned about private views and tries to work projects such that as much as private views can be maintained, but that's not always possible. My concern is that if there were a first-story addition and we don't have the information, but I would doubt, just looking at what the setbacks are, that one could even build very much on the first floor, and certainly because the house is so small, probably wouldn't even be worth it. I don't have any problems with the second-story addition. I have problems, I guess, with the nature of the roof material, and I would like BAR to relook that. And I think the appellant did have some good ideas about it, to reducing the reflective nature. Even if it's a little bit, it can be annoying. So that would be my one concern. The other is that I like this is not in question, but I do like the architectural nature of the building. I think that's okay. It always rankled me that Summerlin got heightened BAR noticing. Well, and now the entire county we're going to look at that today. So I think that that will serve the rest of the county well, and I don't know what to say about noticing. It's a problem, and Ms. Clark hasn't responded to my earlier question about what the noticing was, unless she has that information to get a fuller understanding of what happened there.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Brown, are you asking?
Well, from that first BAR meeting, what did they do?
What did they do? I believe they recommended some restudying there, and then I unfortunately don't have the minutes in my notes, but I believe they recommended a restudy, if I recall correctly, and told the told the applicant to come back for further review.
Okay, and was the follow-on meeting agendized for a certain, so was it taken off, then it had to be taken off calendar then? Okay, so the meeting was taken off calendar. And what is the practice when we take things off calendar? Are they renoticed? No.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, no, they're not. And I would say the majority of BAR cases are taken off calendar and not just
And not-
continued at conceptual.
Okay, so then it's up to the interested people to follow when it might.
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you. So those are my comments about the project.
Thank you. My comments will be short. I don't have any problem denying this appeal. One thing that I find interesting, and it's going to cause me great concern in the next month or two, is this creating a non-conforming condition, and you've done that here. And I'm pretty sure when this house was built, those setbacks weren't there. The setbacks occurred in the ordinance likely after the property was developed. So you end up with situations like that that cause great concern. And this one doesn't make any sense anyway. If I take a look at the two setbacks, there's no building envelope. I mean, because you've got a basically two front yard setbacks, so there's no building. You couldn't build anything. So why would you create a lot where you couldn't build a structure? It makes no sense. I agree with Commissioner Cooney. I would go a little farther. I would actually tell me I have to go back to the BAR and get a non-reflective roof, or make that a condition of today's approval, but I will concede to however you want to address that issue. I think those are the comments, and it's back to Commissioner Cooney for a motion.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I very much appreciate the careful consideration to this matter. The striking aspect of it is how personal it has become. We have two architects, one of whom is the appellant, and he lives in another beautiful area of the state, which I know to be hyper-conscious of design review, and I'm sure he deals with these issues all the time. And I'm not sure what they are, but I am comfortable that a second-story addition on this lot at this time is consistent with the design review guidelines that we generally apply across the county. Privacy is a heightened concern for us here. It's being taken into account with the lack of windows on the second story. I am accepting the reality of the encroachments. I think the issue for raising that by the appellant is to see what of all the various issues they might raise in objection might stick. But the real crucial issue is the second story. I think they acknowledge that. All parties acknowledge that. It should have a non-reflective roof. I don't want to substitute our judgment for that of any of these design review panels, but I would be comfortable in advising the BAR that it's being referred to them for the roof treatment, and that the commission is concerned about the reflective nature of the metal roof. But I wouldn't limit them to that. If they don't think the color is appropriate, I think they can address that as well. That brings me back to the issue of the modification. And I pay close attention to Ms. Van Mullum whenever she turns her microphone on, because she doesn't do it unless she is concerned. What we're talking about is layering a new modification request on a non-conforming issue, which if it had been presented to us today at least, we wouldn't be able to grant. So we're in the position of interpreting our ordinance to allow us to disregard an existing intrusion into the setback line in order to grant a modification of an additional incursion into the same setback line. And notwithstanding the fact that it may be minor, it's described by Mr. Smith as an overhang. It's a technical violation. And what does that mean for the next project down the street when they come in and they have an existing setback modification? And we're asked to increase that another 20% or less. I think we do have the possibility of proliferating concern, and if we're going to say our modification rules are different for Summerlin, that's one thing, but I'm very reluctant to do that. And I know from personal experience that modifications are granted only where the circumstances clearly justify it, and that our setback lines are taken as seriously as they are anywhere, including Marin County. So I'm going to have to say that I can't support this design with the existing circumstances as indicated when a further modification is sought. And I am mindful that Ms. Clark in her staff report pointed out there's a net reduction in setback intrusion when you take out the shed in the back. There's no question of the shed coming out, and I realize that, but if this project stays within the footprint of the existing building, then I think we can approve it. Otherwise, I don't think we can. So sure.
Well, I'm responding. As I understood it, it's the second story that's going to encroach into the setback, am I correct? Well, that creates a little problem for me, because in most cases, at least in my experience as a builder, that's not considered an encroachment if it's not the foundation. For example, when I do bay windows, or if I do bays, as long as the bay doesn't go to the foundation, it's not an encroachment. So I think if we're talking about a cantilevered portion of the second story, that would not be considered an encroachment of the setback. For example, you have setbacks on side yards. Well, the roof doesn't count. You could take your roof all the way to the property line, as a matter of fact. So maybe Ms. Black could help us here a little bit.
Ms. Black, just before you do, I recall from reading these modification rules carefully that there is a different amount of setback for overhangs. It is specifically addressed in our code, and I'm not sure that we don't need time to consider that in the light of this application, if what weighs in the balance is approval of the appeal or not.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney, that might be a more appropriate way of handling this. I can tell you that setback is defined as the minimum distance required between a building and a property line in order to provide an open yard area which is unoccupied and unobstructed from the ground upward. So upward to, we typically consider that to be from the ground to the sky, unobstructed. And then there are some encroachments that can occur for architectural elements, but I don't have that right in front of me, so.
And I'm always concerned, as you are, Commissioner Cooney, about, precedents and what happened in the next project. I think you hit the nail on the head, though. The one difference here is that we actually have a net decrease in the encroachment. Even though it currently exceeds the 20%, it's a net decrease from what currently exists and what's currently legal. So I think on that basis, we can make the finding and not be in danger of a precedent, because that would be a good precedent. If they want to encroach a little here but come back to another area, it's no change. So,
Mr. Chair, we're at the point of deliberations, and we're about to make an important determination for these parties. I would recommend that we take our lunch break at this time and allow Ms. Black and I to look at those provisions I'm thinking about. It might provide a solution, it might not, but otherwise we'll return at whatever time the chair suggests and take this matter up and conclude it.
We'll be adjourned to 1 o'clock. We're on item number 4, and I believe Mr. Cooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we took our lunch break, I understood that staff was going to again look at the issue of the modification and discuss with the applicants whether a redesign would solve the problem. And I don't know if staff has any information on that at this point, but I'd like to first hear that, and then we can proceed back to deliberations.
Mr. Chair, I don't think we reached any other conclusion than what we were discussing before you took your break, and that is that this 20% yard area issue really revolves around whether or not you include the non-conforming structure in the yard or not, and the ordinance is not crystal clear on that point. I think a reasonable construction would be that you would include it, but it's not 100% clear. We did talk to the applicant's architect and suggested that they look at whether they could redesign the second-story element to pull it out of that area that is encroaching into the setback and requiring this modification, or if they would prefer to handle it in a different way. So perhaps you want to hear from the architect.
Yeah, please. If you could address Mr. Cooney's, or Commissioner Cooney's question.
Okay. Commissioner Cooney, thank you. From adjourning over lunch quickly, and I apologize, my client has not yet arrived yet. She's busy paying the bill. But as near as I can figure here, let me see, is the problem that we have right now is there is, on the first floor, there is a wall right here which divides the living room and kitchen from the 2 bedrooms and a bathroom over here. And because this room this was the bigger of the 2 bedrooms, this area from here to here was the most likely place to put a stairwell, because that's an existing bearing wall and it's away from the windows that look out on the street. So that's why we had the stairway here, and that was the landing. In re-examining this, if we take the entire second floor area here, if we can shift it over so that this wall here lines up over the exterior wall of the house there, which I believe would be 5 feet from the property line, I think I can configure the stairway so we enter it down here and climb up, and we should be able to get over the hallway at this point. We should be able to get enough altitude that we can get to the second floor around here. So my only question was asking my planner if moving this second floor so that it's 5 feet away from this property line, as opposed to it being about 10 feet right now, if that's going to prevent worse problems than make sure. I want to make sure that the solution's not worse than the problem.
Ms. Black, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I think that aligning the structure so that it meets that, so that it matches this line of the structure would not result in any further encroachment. It would simply be a second floor addition in the same area and would not implicate any of the issues that we've been discussing with respect to the modification. So I think that would be a workable solution.
Well, that certainly would ease my concern that we're setting a precedent for other structures in the neighborhood, most of which have non-conforming existing structures. Yes. So, if we do it for your clients, then it's going to be hard for us to say no to the next applicant.
No, I understand. I sit on a board myself, and I run into this frequently.
Well, Mr. Chair, with the concurrence of the applicant, I propose today that I'm speaking generally now rather than making a specific motion, but just to get the reaction of my fellow commissioners, that we send the project to the BAR, our BAR, at an early opportunity with directions that they limit their review of this project to the roof treatment, and that the existing second story will be redesigned to coincide with the changes that the applicant has indicated here, and that would be an appealable decision, but the clear implication is that it would come back here to us if in fact there is an appeal from that decision. But we're just looking for the roof treatment, and we would indicate in our minutes that we do accept the second story as designed with that slight shift. And the other problems as well would be disregarded. So,
Commissioner, were you intending on making a motion to deny the appeal as part of that motion?
well, it's a partial denial and a partial approval. That is, the approval of the roof treatment would be valid. So it is a mixed decision as I propose it. But it's very limited. I think we've done this in another recent project where we referred a matter back to BAR for their input. You know, now, I suppose we could limit their input to advice only, in which case it would not necessarily involve a decision of that board, and we would continue our action to a future hearing with the input from MBAR on that design issue, that is the roof treatment.
I guess the reason I asked the question is that in the event, well, what I would not want to do is to not make a decision today, make some decision 3 months from now, and then for the appellant to be able to appeal that to the board. I think we need to take an action today so that if the appellant wants to appeal to the board, they're going to do so now, not delay this another 6 or 12 months.
Well, let me ask staff if if we deny the appeal and uphold the project as with instructions to the BAR, if that's sufficient action. I mean, is that a true denial of the appeal?
Well, Mr. Chair, the reason and Commissioner Cooney, the reason I look a bit puzzled is you're not really approving the appeal or denying the appeal. You're modifying the action, I think, today. You're saying we're not going to approve this particular configuration. You're approving a different configuration. So you would essentially be eliminating the modification and making adjustments to the CDP, I believe. And so the only question is, would you come back before, would you take final action today and then potentially face an appeal of the BAR's decision? Because I think their final decision, because that's what it would go back to them, would be appealable because this is different than the preliminary that they saw before. So it might be more streamlined to simply refer this back to the BAR and have us develop findings that would support your action as you've proposed it today. That might be a better, more streamlined way to deal with it. Otherwise, you may face another appeal of the BAR.
Mm-hmm. So our action would be to refer the matter to BAR for specific input and action on a roof treatment alone.
I think, and Mr. Chair, and I think to review the realigned location of the structure. I don't expect that they would have a significant issue with it, but I think to be clean, they should do a revised preliminary review and consider the roof treatment as well as the realignment.
All right, in that we're upholding the applicant's second story element in general. Is it our final decision today that this would be, the appeal would be denied? Is that what you're suggesting?
Mr. Chair, I think there are two appeals, and Commissioner Cooney, on this project. One is the modification, and you're actually not granting the modification. So I think you're granting the appeal on the modification, and you're denying the appeal on the CDP as it's proposed to be revised. But I would recommend you not take that action until you hear back from the BAR.
Oh, okay.
and have
That's what I
findings.
misunderstood. I thought you were counseling final action today. So we're going to continue put this back on a future calendar for the Planning Commission so that we can take final action?
How quick
Yes, I
we
think
can,
that's
how
the right
quickly
thing
can
to
we do that?
Mr. Chair, it really depends on how quickly the applicant can produce those revised drawings and come up with a different roof material for the BAR to consider. Then we'll get them on the next available BAR meeting.
Can we set a date certain, though, for
Yeah.
us to at least take it up, even if it turns out it's not ready?
Mr.
Mr. Smith, you
Yes.
would like to comment on our proposed action here?
Well, as far as the ins and outs of procedure, I confess I'm not entirely clear what the end result is, what the end result of today is going to be. As far as coming up with the necessary preliminary drawings, that should not take very long at all. If staff can present me with some dates, I'm sure I should be able to meet them.
Great, that's what we need to know. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chair, while we're waiting, I just want to make sure that I'm clear, is that when this goes to the BAR, they're going to look at two issues, the roofing material and the realignment issue?
Correct.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Ms. Black, do you have some dates proposed for us?
July 1.
I think it probably will be July 1.
Okay. Let's at least set it for that, and then if we get there and we're not ready, we'll continue it for as short a time as we can. All right, my motion, Mr. Chair, is to continue this item to the Planning Commission meeting of July 1, 2009, to refer this matter to the Board of Architectural Review at its earliest possible meeting date to consider two items only: the roof treatment for the second-story addition and the realignment to reduce the amount of intrusion into the setback area.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? I guess I'm going to just have to say my only concern is I wish there was a better way to do that. I hate the idea of postponing the ability of the appellant to make a further appeal for an additional 2 months, which is what we're doing. I wish council and staff could come up with a better solution so that if they are going to appeal to the board, it gets done now, not 2 months from now.
Mr. Chair, I guess my concern is twofold. Number one, I'm not sure the appellant really knows what they're appealing at this point if you were to take action because they haven't seen a drawing. And number two, there's a process that's going to occur at the BAR that's also appealable. So it's I don't know that it's going to really save anybody any time.
You answered my question. There isn't one. It's the question. I just was making comment. I wish there was, because this is one of the cases where I think appeals can be abusive. So I see no other light. Commissioner Cooney, you have your light on? Do you have another comment?
I'm just ready to vote, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. I see no other comments. Ms. Oppen, if you'll read the roll.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. Thank you all. Now, Ms. Oppen, do we need to set up for item 5? I know, Mary. Okay, I think we're now ready to go. Ms. Hoffman, would you read item 5 into the record?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of Laurel Perez, agent for the owners Devereaux Creek Properties, LLC, that the County Planning Commission consider and adopt a recommendation to the County Board of Supervisors that they adopt an ordinance 09-ORD-4, application filed on March 30th, 2009, and 09-RZN-6, application filed on March 30th, 2009, and to accept the exemption pursuant to Section 15265 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. Mark Walter from B&D. Before I actually launch into this, and I will try and keep it short, I just wanted to give you a couple words of background. This is really a legal housekeeping item. There is no request, I should say, to actually reconsider the entirety of the project.
Which brings up an interesting question that Commissioner Brown asked me earlier today, why this is not on the consent agenda item. Just for curiosity, could it have been, or is it just a choice?
Mr. Chair, the feeling was that this is an ordinance, that it's still an amendment to the ordinance, and it's an amendment of the county zoning map, and those would not normally be consent items.
Great, it was education here. It wasn't any kind of criticism, just wanted to know. Thanks.
So having said that, this is, of course, a rezoning ordinance amendment consideration for the Ocean Meadows residences. And since 3 of the members of the board were not here in 2004 when this last went before the commission, I did want to give a small amount of background so that you have some context for the request that's being made today. Some of you, or all of you, may know that the Ocean Meadows residences are proposed in this Elwood-Devereaux Coast area. In fact, you can see the golf course right here. It's west of Stork Road and south of Phelps Road and north of the Devereaux Slough area. And just a closer look here, again, you can see the golf course itself. You can see Stork Road to the east and 2 UCSB parcels which actually flank the golf course. And so this is Whittier Drive, which some people have asked about, and Stork Road over here. There is an access road along this portion of university property, and then the married student housing here. Now, back in 2004, the original project that went before your commission had a description that included a 41-lot subdivision of the golf course itself, and then a 26-unit condominium subdivision of one of those lots. So that was the residential portion. There were various commercial recreational amenities proposed as well, most of which would be in the same lot as the 26-unit condominium. There were also 2 legislative actions. One was a land use designation change under the general plan amendment. That still stands. The other was a rezone of all the rest of the golf course that was not being developed, which was approximately 63 out of the 70 acres would remain as golf course. That is currently zoned PRD 58. That would be rezoned to recreational. When your commission took action last time, you did recommend that that be done, and you sent that recommendation up to the board. Now, what that would allow, just very quickly, and you can see it here, is under the proposed subdivision, you would have a number of lots in the southern portion of the golf course here, flanked by UCSB property. Those would be residential, market rate, single-family dwellings. To the north here, fronting onto Whittier Drive, would be the condominium complex, part of which is affordable, 21 affordable units, and 5 which are market rate, plus the recreational facilities and amenities as well. The rezone then, which you see here, would leave those portions, those 2 areas right here that are shaded, zoned as PRD 58. The remainder of the golf course would be rezoned to recreational. So of the original project, which went before you in 2004, the only thing that we're reconsidering today is this portion right down here, is rezoning the golf course property, exclusive of that portion being developed, from PRD 58 to REC. So for today, we're looking at the rezone of Lot 41 in specific from PRD 58 to REC, and adding a new permitted use to the recreational zone district in the coastal zone. Right. So, rezone of Lot 41. And just, again, everybody, I am sure knows this, but the zoning map itself is part of the zoning ordinance. When this went before you in 2004, what was being looked at was amending the coastal zoning ordinance, Article 2, to amend the coastal zoning map to rezone the golf course from PRD to REC. That was heard by your commission. You recommended that that be done. That recommendation went to the board. Recommendation, I should say, went to the board. Unfortunately, in the intervening 5 years, a number of things happened, including the certification of the rezone by the Coastal Commission expired, other items didn't get done in a timely manner, and the land use development code that is now in place and in effect in the inland area will soon replace Article 2 in the coastal zone. Article 2 will basically become part of the LUDC. And that will occur before this project can make its way back, likely either to the board, but for sure back to the Coastal Commission. As such, what we need to do now to rezone the golf course is not to do a rezone under Article 2, which you've already done, but to amend the zoning map under the LUDC. With respect to the new permitted use, again, this comes up simply because the amount of years that have passed since the original approval have resulted in expiration of the Coastal Commission's actions. When the rezone went to the Coastal Commission previously, they considered it and they certified it with modifications. One of those modifications was that a new permitted use be added to the recreational zone district within the coastal zone. That new use was basically to allow habitat restoration, wetland rehabilitation as a new permitted, principally permitted use in the rec zone district. Now that came back to the Board of Supervisors, who could not take final action on the project itself or any of the legislative actions because there was no access to the development. Those all expired. The amendments expired. The Coastal Commission's actions expired. What we are asking today is that we amend the LUDC to allow that new permitted use in order to streamline the process when it does go back to the Coastal Commission. So again, that would add a new permitted use to the rec zone district, specifically to allow, as a principally permitted use, habitat restoration. And that's in the coastal zone only. It's not inland, in the coastal zone. So having gone through the twists and turns of that, the recommendation, which you can see in section 2, is basically that your commission adopt the findings and recommend that the Board of Supervisors adopt the findings. Recommend that the board find that the amendment is statutorily exempt under CEQA per section 15265, and adopt a resolution, which you do have as an attachment to your staff report, a planning commission resolution, recommending that the board adopt an ordinance amending the LUDC to add, and this is the language from the Coastal Commission, habitat and wetland rehabilitation and or restoration as a permitted use in the rec zone district, and that's in the coastal zone, and amend the county zoning map to change the zoning of Lot 41 from PRD to REC. So if you have any questions.
Mr. Cooney has a question.
Mr. Walter, did you consider carefully that you only wanted to amend the ordinance with respect to the LUDC portion in the coastal zone? I mean, I'm not sure why we don't want that as a permitted use in all rec districts.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cooney, the reason that this was not carried forward into the inland area is because the recommendation, or I should say the strong request from the Coastal Commission, in terms of their certification of the rezone, was that we add this within the coastal zone, which is where they have their jurisdiction. There would be no nexus for us to add it within the rest of the inland area. The way that when we looked at this, what we were doing is taking this project back. We weren't adding something to the project.
Well, I'm not sure that the use of the word nexus is really what is appropriate there. I think what we're talking about is the potential of an amendment, a more broad amendment than the very narrowly prescribed one. It wouldn't be of disadvantage to the applicant. We're talking about not just this project, but all future projects. And what you're saying is this will only affect future projects in the coastal zone. And I just wondered if staff had considered the ramifications of applying it throughout the rec designation in the county within the inland area as well.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Cooney, perhaps it would make more sense just for symmetry purposes, but in the coastal zone, the commission is very particular about what is considered a principal permitted use, and they like all of the uses to be specified. Frankly, if somebody were to come into an area in recreationally zoned property in the inland area and said they wanted to do habitat restoration, we would not stand in their way through a permit process. So I think it's a distinction that's not particularly important in the inland area. It's something we would allow. But, you know, I understand how it will look odd in the land use development code, coastal and inland.
Great, thank you. Now, anyone in the audience would like to make comment on this item? Seeing none, seeing no slips, I will close it to public hearing and come back to the commission for deliberations and motions. This is a third district item, I believe. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. This is new for me. As I read through the staff report, I just kept seeing habitat and wetland rehabilitation or restoration. Sounds good to me. I'd like to hear from my fellow commissioners who might have more experience, might have been here at that time.
Commissioner Valencia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was here at the time, and it was very contentious. This place was full of people, but finally we got it approved, and I thought by now we'd have it done. But this seems to be just like a housekeeping problem, you know, so I'm in favor of it. Thank you.
And I'll just pipe in and say, there's nothing substantive here. It's just cleaning up a little housekeeping mess. So I think if you want to make the motion, I think we'll probably get this item resolved.
Okay, I will make that motion then. I move that we adopt the findings, recommend the board adopt the findings, recommend that the board find the amendment is statutorily exempt from CEQA. Section 15265, as staff has recommended, and that we adopt the resolution recommending the board adopt the ordinance amending the land use to add habitat and wetland rehabilitation and/or restoration as permitted in the rec zone, and amend the county zoning map to change the zoning of Lot 41 from PRD to rec.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Oppen, would you read the roll call?
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown? Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Thank you. Now, you'll read in item 6. Do we need to read that in, or is that just a recommendation here? Yes, I think we need to have, right under the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is the hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department that the County Planning Commission consider and adopt a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that they adopt an ordinance, case number 09-ORD-5, amending Article 35.10, Land Use and Development Code Administration of Section 35-1, the Santa Barbara County Land Use and Development Code of Chapter 35, Zoning of the County Code that would revise the existing procedures regarding the noticing of applications for development.
And if I recall this item correctly, this is something we've been looking at for some time, and at our last meeting at this issue, there was a few minor changes we discussed. So if we could highlight those minor changes, I think we can dispense with this pretty rapidly. Oh, we're waiting for staff to come back? Okay. Well, I see staff at both ends. Here we go. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Just like to do a brief overview. We have talked about noticing procedures numerous times. This culminates about 2 years' worth of work. Actually, going back farther, we've done a lot in the area of noticing. Our goal here primarily is to make the notices more visible and to get people involved earlier. The theory being if you get the public involved in a project in its infancy, so to speak, there's more of a chance that any issues that might arise can be addressed. Ideally, there'll be fewer appeals down the road, and also the finished product, what's actually built, should be better if all goes well. That's the intent. I think you know the background. This goes back to 2005. I'll go past that. We did make quite a few noticing changes about 3 years ago, and those we've learned a lot, and some of the changes proposed now are in reaction to those. The main thing that is changing as it relates to land use permits, excuse me, is that, first of all, the new more visible sign is proposed, the sign on the right, 18 by 24 inches. We're proposing where, there are 2 separate frontages that notices be posted on both. We had a recent case that you might remember. Thank you. That was brought to our attention where a second notice on a second frontage would certainly have helped the whole review process, and we think that's a legitimate thing to request. We are proposing that Planning and Development take back the noticing requirement. For the last 3 years, mailed notices have been done by applicants. We think it's just simpler to have the staff do it. And those are really the primary things, the new notices through lots and then staff doing the noticing. In terms of regional BARs, again, we'd like to use the new notices. The other change is where there is an initial concept review, and the vast majority of projects submit for initial BAR as well as a land use permit, CDP, something like that. So they're noticed, but there are instances where that is not the case. And we looked at about 6 months worth of records. For the North BAR, everything had notice. There would be no additional noticing. The Central BAR, if memory serves, was about 5 additional projects, not even 1 a month, would have notice. And then the South BAR, that has far and away the most projects, there would have been about 1 or 2 per month. I think it was 11 over a 6-month period, but they had on the order of 180 projects reviewed, or not projects, but items placed on the standard agenda. So it's about a 5% increase for that one BAR, but we feel that getting the public involved earlier, and there were a couple of projects where several initial concept reviews occurred, and it was not generally known, and we just think it would be better for the whole process if people are made aware. For discretionary projects, one of the most important things we're proposing is that when an application is deemed complete, so that's usually an iterative process, please submit more information. But once all the information is submitted, the staff is starting their analysis, we'd like to send a notice to neighbors, not a posted notice, because that notice could remain for quite a while, a mailed notice. And that way, again, pulls interested parties into the process, and now the county has a much better online ability to get information about projects, so we feel it's in the interest of good public review, good project review to do that. We are proposing for most projects the sign on the left be used. For conditional use permits, any rezoning general plan amendment or development plan, with the exception of the 20,000 square foot threshold development plans, those use the larger sign, and that was a suggestion coming out of your commission at our workshop a couple of months ago. So we are proposing, in a nutshell, 2 posted notices where there's a through lot. Wherever posting is required, the new, more visible notice, the department doing all the mailing, BAR initial concept reviews, and then discretionary notices once something is deemed complete, a mailed notice being sent, and then the posted notice being used prior to review of a negative declaration, EIR, or Planning Commission review. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I just have one. I think I may have asked this before, but are we going to see from you a copy of the notice?
Mr. Chairman, do you mean the mailed notice?
Yeah, a generic one. And I'll tell you why I say that. I won't say which city's worse, but one of the cities near here, I think, does an absolute horrible job. It is a mimeograph thing that's not done too good. It's stapled over, put a stamp on, and a sticker. It looks like the worst piece of junk mail you're getting in the mailbox. I'd like to see something that definitely looks more professional, so that when you look at it, it's like, I need to open this and read it, as opposed to it goes in the junk mail pile. So I don't need to do it before we take this action, but at some point in time, I'd love to see you bring it to the commission, let us look at it and comment on it, and also how envelope you use and how you use the labels. It's just, it's kind of helpful. We've had a number of people complain that they got notice, they didn't know what it was. They thought it was junk mail, so. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. The question has to do with, the proposal is department mails notice when application is complete. Now, that notice goes to only people within 300 feet of the project. And then, when the draft ND EIR is released, then the applicant posts the bigger notice. Okay. So for discretionary projects, which I presume most will probably have an ND or EIR, there's probably, that's would be the case. You're going to get the posted notice in advance of the conceptual review. BAR no.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, the way that it works right now on a discretionary project is the first time that anybody is formally aware of a project is 10 days prior to a hearing or action.
Right.
Or release of an environmental document. So we mail notice to the people who live within 300 feet or the people who own property within 300 feet, as well as interested property owners,
Right.
when we prepare an environmental document and ask them to comment on that document. And then we both post a site and mail notice 10 days prior to a hearing, or at least 10 days prior to a hearing.
Right.
And that's all they get today. So what we're proposing is that mailed notice would occur once an application is complete, so that's well in advance of
Right.
any environmental document
Right.
be released. But we struggled with, do we want to post the site at that point? Because some projects are in the review process for longer than I want to even say. Going through environmental review and the hearing process. So we thought a compromise would be to simply mail the notice at that point and then post it when the review process was really active through the environmental document and hearing stage.
If your objective is to get as many community members informed and involved in the process, it would seem to me that you would need to, one way to do that is to do the thing that you don't want to do, and that's post the notice, because they're not getting the mailed notice of the conceptual BAR review until they won't get a conceptual notice because the conceptual review will have taken place.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, I left out one, and that is every application that goes to the BAR will receive mailed notice on conceptual review.
Right, but that's only if it's, let's say it's a big discretionary project.
It's
only people within the 300 feet.
That's correct.
So you're going to probably miss a larger segment. If it's a big shopping center, you're going to miss that segment of people within the community who live 400 feet, 1,000, who would not have that opportunity to go to conceptual BAR review or be noticed of it.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brown, that's certainly possible. Those aren't the types of projects that seem to cause issues with notice now. People
I
seem
know,
to find out about
no,
those
it's
now.
the little stuff, and usually, oftentimes, developers put up big signs anyway, well in advance. No, I realize, it's the conceptual notice, it's the littler projects, it's the neighborhood things that foster a lot of the problems.
Those are the ones that tend to fall through the cracks, but, you know, a larger project could if, in certain circumstances, I suppose. It doesn't seem to be the case very often.
Commissioner Brooks.
Yes, thank you, Chair Blau. I want to ask a question about the mailings to the neighbors. If the neighbor, let's say it's not owner occupied, it's a rental, and if the notice is sent to the owner of the unit, and that owner is unknown to the postman, or, you know, they live somewhere else, that, I imagine it gets returned to your office? What happens with that?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Brooks, it's actually mailed to the owner at their address, not at the property address. So we use the tax rolls, and it's sent to them wherever they live.
Okay, I think that is my concern. Then what about the resident in that unit? If they're renters, and they do not get a notice then?
They do not get a notice, that's correct.
Gee, I'd love to see them get a notice.
Why should they?
Well, why shouldn't they? If they're involved in the community and the neighborhood, it's just a matter of putting occupant and that address on it. We're probably not talking very often or very many, but it would seem to me that would be a more equitable way for the neighborhood to be totally involved and totally informed.
The trouble with that is if you put the owner's name or occupant, then the owner of the property doesn't get notice.
No, the owner gets the notice, and then for the renter, it would be addressed as occupant at that address.
How would you know whether it was an occupant or a renter? Or owner or a renter?
Well, if there's the same person, obviously.
Oh, no, see, I have lots of properties, and the tax statements go to my house, they go to my office. So even though I live there, my tax statement doesn't go there. So how would you determine which is which? I mean, it'd be a nightmare.
Well, you know, in the coastal zone, renters get noticed.
Within 100 feet.
Mr. Chair, if you send anybody mail, renter or occupant, it goes straight in the trash. You need to be more personal than that.
I personally think it's a rare case where where the renter would be disadvantaged by a failure to have notice. I just can't imagine, to tell you the truth.
You know, it's just so interesting that it's a double standard within the coastal zone or the inland zone. Coastal zone gets the notice, inland zone doesn't, if you're a renter. I just find that not an equitable process if you're trying to involve the community. That's my own thing.
Mr. Brooks?
Yes, I went to my first process improvement team meeting when I was in another life, and it was exactly on this issue that, you know, we felt that this was very important. And there was a case fairly recently in our neighborhood, and when I did get a list, a mailing list, and I would say close to 50% of the people who were notified lived out of the area. And the very long-term renters knew nothing about it. So if you're giving, you know, you might have even a renter, well, let's say you have an owner 300 feet away, but yet that the person that doesn't live in the property itself doesn't know about this. It just doesn't seem fair. And I don't know if we're dealing with fairness, but I think we are trying to get the public involved. And if you live in the community, I think that's, you know, we do want the public involved early in the process.
Seeing no more lights, I think we're ready
So-
for, oh, excuse me.
Mr. Chair, I
Yeah.
think when we talked about this before, we talked about the fact that except for these discretionary projects where there would only be mailed notice up front, all the other projects will be posted on site, and the way we were trying to accommodate renters in the area is the site's posted, and at least they could see it. So that's the only response I have. State law is just different in the coastal zone versus the inland area, and we're just continuing with that. It doesn't mean we have to, but that's where we're at.
Commissioner Cooney.
Just to express an additional factor that I think is realistic in terms of getting the word out to the community of important projects. The county is, in my view, planning and development in particular, is very careful to add to its mailing list for any project, anyone or organization who asks for notice of particular projects in my neighborhood, and I think throughout the county, as part of homeowners associations, neighborhood associations. The leaders of those groups, if they notify the county, are inundated with notices throughout the county. And but that's the right way to do it, because they can pick and choose the ones that affect their members and then get the word out. And I think they're very good at that. So I'm not saying it eliminates it. No system is going to be perfect. But what is being proposed and what we have guided staff to prepare for us is much improved, I believe, in terms of actual notice. We had a case earlier today where there were extensive allegations of lack of notice, but that was of formal notice. In fact, the applicant, by his own testimony, indicated that he knew about it. And that's the key here, is to get the word out. And I think the effort we're making to this point in staff's recommendation is adequate. Not perfect, but adequate and much better than what we had before.
Mr. Brown.
Well, I would like to follow on Commissioner Cooney's comments with the great improvement in noticing. Like Commissioner Brooks, I was involved in Pitt way back when it started, and noticing was one of the big issues, certainly for me, and I know within the group. So it's very gratifying to see that you've come full circle, that you're noticing conceptual BAR. I think that's just such a huge improvement by itself right there, because that's where a lot of problems have occurred, that people didn't get that notice. And as you know, that's where kind of all the action takes place, if you will, in terms of design. So I'm very supportive of what you're trying to do here. I like the signs. I think they're very understated, but they will get your notice with a nice red stripe around the edge. So I think that's good.
Commissioner Valencia.
Mr. Chair, sometimes we're trying to do the right thing, but sometimes we go overboard in some of these things, and the cost, we have to remember that planning is going to lose about 20-some positions, that the cost of government is really excessive. Yesterday in the mail, I got a check for $1 because I overpaid my taxes. $1 from the government. They probably cost $50 to process that check. So let's be careful that we don't put in things that just cost government too much. People are smarter than we sometimes give them credit for. They'll look at signs and they'll check the paper, and they know sometimes I know I get calls before things come out, and I wonder, how do these people know? I mean, they're checking the notices to the newspaper. They read something, and I hadn't received any information. I didn't check the paper. So we don't have to lead them by the hand. They're going to get there.
That being said, I'm going to go forward and make a motion that we adopt the recommendations as set forth in the staff report 2.0.
And I'll second it very gladly.
Any further discussion? I see, yes, you wish to comment.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm just recommending one minor change to the language of the ordinance. It's section 35106.020C. So it's at the top of page 5, and just to delete "and residents." And because right now it says it's for an optional notice for 1,000 owners, when there's more than 1,000 owners of property, and the government code requires that, or states that when there's over 1,000 owners to be mailed out, that instead of mailing it, you can do the notice in the newspaper. And we actually have owners or residents. So that would make it more often that we would do it by, it would allow us to do it by newspaper rather than the mailing, and that would be out of compliance with the government code. So just recommending delete and residents.
I guess what you're
So to
saying
the
is,
top-
well, if you're saying that we don't have to mail to the individual owners if it's over 1,000, let's think about that for a second. Over 1,000, okay, that's probably all right. That's a big enough threshold.
So, and that matches the language of the government code.
Okay.
For it to be
So-
for owners. And right,
means
so it's
divide the
just
notice.
deleting and residents.
Any other changes?
That's it.
I'll amend my motion to include Ms. McMullen's changes. Diane, you have more?
Mr. Chair, you might just want to note that you haven't received any speaker slips. on this
Excuse me,
item.
that's correct, I meant to say that. There are no speakers, no speaker slips, the place is empty, so pretty safe.
The community has entrusted us with this very important action, so that speaks well for our working on their behalf.
Great. Okay, I have no more lights on. Ms. Hoplin, if you read the roll.
Commissioner Cooney?
Aye.
Commissioner Brown?
Aye.
Commissioner Brooks?
Aye.
Commissioner Valencia?
Aye.
Commissioner Blau?
Aye.
Vote carries 5-0.
Thank you.